Well, later at night for me, later in the afternoon for you. It's always mad when I speak to people across the world and the differences in our time zones at times, considering that many people are still through their day and I'm coming towards the end of my day. And that's nice because you get to see what people are up to for the rest of their day.
Yeah, no, I have a bunch of friends in Scotland and I constantly am going through the same thing where I'm like, wait, can I text him right now or no? He's probably sleeping, so I got to wait for tomorrow. So I'm well familiar with it. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I pick up a few messages. It's like, oh, it's 2 a.m. when I received that one. So, yeah, it's not bad. But I love the hierarchy. Is that Maslow's hierarchy of needs behind you, or is that an adaptation?
So that's the Pyramid of Success by John Wooden, the basketball coach. I'm not in any way a fan of basketball, really, but I really like that coach. For a course I was in, we had to read a book by John Wooden, and that's sort of his sort of visual version of like everything that goes into coaching. And the book was pretty impactful for me. So I got one of the other teachers I work with to sort of print out. He's the graphic design teacher. So I sent him the image and I said, hey, I really like this. Can you make a post? He did the same thing. I got the 8 lessons from Ted Lasso for teaching.
I love that.
So yeah. I had him print it out for me. I'm like, so he's a buddy of mine. So he just, and I mean, it's a joke, but that's me up there. That's not really me reading Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice is my least favorite book. I hate it. But he made a poster and he superimposed my face on it because he's a friend of mine and he likes to give me a hard time. So it goes both ways. It's positive and negative. So
I love it though. I've got that exact same poster, not as nice as your one, mine of Ted Lasso. It's literally one that I took off Google, and but I literally say to the kids that I work with, right, I'm like, right, which of Ted Lasso's lessons are you taking away today, or what one am I going to apply to you? And it's just a simple thing for them to look at, just something for them to really consider, and then it's like, right, at the end of the day, have you held yourself accountable towards this standard or this lesson, or have we contributed towards your learning, whereby we can really evaluate the effectiveness of today? So it's just little things like that. And part of what I do, I work in a behavior unit, right? So we take some of our most challenging students in our school, we place them all together with me, and then a couple of other staff, and then we do some work with them across their day. So we have kids aged from 11 to 16, a real mix of different personalities, a real mix of different needs, and obviously in different spectrums. So we get year 7s who've come right in, literally new to high school and very early on in the curriculum. Then you get year 11s who are literally preparing for their exams. So it's a very diverse range that we get with us every day. So there's a lot of different work which we get to do with them. But it's all about the life lessons that we give alongside their curriculum, especially if we're getting like year 11s in and they got testing behaviors because they're leaving school in 5 months. So it's all about how we can set them up and maximize this opportunity with them, rather than trying to look at a negative and going, right, you've been isolated for this, or this is a real negative situation. We actually don't have much time left, so how much work can we put into you?
That sounds incredible. Like, sounds pretty exciting. I mean, I'm sure there are challenging days, but I mean, just the diverse, nature of that sort of job description sounds like it would be constantly, I mean, and that's right up my alley. I'd rather be in pain than be bored. Right. So like, I love being challenged, whether it's coaching. I mean, I'm a classroom teacher. I've been, teaching in public school for 22 years. So like, and I tell my boss all the time, put me with the most challenge. I kind of prefer that, right? Like, because that was me growing up. Like, I know that I'm very aware that I was a difficult student. And it's funny when I tell people that I haven't seen since like high school, 25 years ago. Wow, no, it's actually more than that. It's like 30 years ago. Wow, I'm old. But when I run into them, they're like, oh, what do you do now? And I'm like, oh, I'm a teacher. They're like, shut up. No, you're not. Stop. Because they remember me, how difficult I was. And so, but yeah, no, that sounds great. Like, just sort of that opportunity to work with kids in that sort of capacity sounds phenomenal.
No, I love it. And then you've hit the nail on the head there, really, because sometimes you get the most challenging kids, right? They're really good argumentative and they're really good defensively, and they've got a range of different skills and they analyze situations. I'm like, you would make a great solicitor, you'd make a great lawyer, you'd make a great teacher, actually. oh, why? All I do is argue. Well, actually, you've got that presence. You can actually channel that into commanding a class. You actually bring people together with you. So although it's negative right now, actually, if you're a teacher, it's really good because you can bring people together and teach them. But also, you've got that presence. You've got that ability to understand the challenging situations that you're going through now as a student. And one day you get to look at students and go, but you know what? Sir was actually right in that moment back when I was a youngster myself. So yeah, I love every day, mate.
Yeah, that's great. No, it's like, listen, then you've won. If you love every day, then you've won. Doesn't matter what you're doing. That's great.
Absolutely. So, Sharp, you sent me your CV, right?
Yeah.
And it's very interesting reading, and I do love it, right? And there's a lot of things which we're going to go through as we get chatting, which I'm really excited to talk about, especially in terms of your current role, your outlook towards the future, the studies and qualifications you have, how you've shaped your own philosophy, your principles, your standards. But take me through the first moment that you thought about coaching. What took you really down the route into it?
Yeah, no. So I got into football because I call it football. I got into football pretty late, actually. I was like the year before my first year of high school. The first sport I ever really got into was wrestling. That was a big sport where I grew up in North Jersey. And I'd done that. I'd been wrestling martial arts and stuff since I was like 3, 4 years old. And when I got to whatever it is, 13 years old, I was talking to my dad and he was like, wrestling's in the winter. You really need to pick a fall sport, do something so you're active. The area I grew up was a great area, but if you didn't play sports, if you weren't involved with something, there wasn't much to do. Like, it was a quiet town. Not where I'm at now. Now I live in a very urban, very inner city environment, which I love. But growing up, it was sort of, if you didn't have that. So got into football relatively late, but immediately got hooked suddenly, playing high school, playing club, playing academy, played in college. And so to answer your question, I think I was in my junior year of college playing. And I did pretty well. I mean, I went to a small Division III school. I was an average player. I just outworked people, to be perfectly frank. I wasn't the most technical. I was a pretty good tactical thinker of the game, but just knowing my limitations, I just was like, nope, small Division III school, allow me to sort of do all the other things I want to do. I was pretty active in my school's theater department, student government. Like, I like doing a lot of different things. Like I said, I really hate being bored. So it was my junior year of college, and I was like, oh man, like, I'm coming to the end of my playing career. Like, I'll play with friends and pick up and, men's leagues and stuff like that. But in terms of the competitive nature, I didn't want to give that up. So I started talking to, at that time, one of my old high school coaches, and he turned me on to United Soccer Coaches, the organization, which at that time was the NSCAA, and took a couple like little courses, like a state diploma, like they're very, very intro level, and then graduated from college, got a teaching job right away in the same school district I'm in now. I've never left. I've been here 22 years. And when I applied, the principal that was interviewing me said, "Oh, I know you have a soccer background. Would you also be interested in coaching? We're starting a women's program. We've never had one. And, I'm of the opinion, if you're interviewing me and you're asking, yep, my answer to everything is going to be yes. Can you ride a horse? Yes, I can. Yeah. Can you scuba dive? Yes, I can. I can't do either of those things. But if you're interviewing me, I'm going to say yes, and I'll figure out how to get there before I get hired." And sort of got thrown in the deep end, right? Like I said, I'd played for a while. My senior year of college, we won our conference title. I was the captain of my college team for a couple of years. So I had to, I'm not the best player in the world, but I have a decent understanding. I think I know what I'm doing. And then got thrown into a program in which very quickly I was made aware that I had no idea, because I had always looked at everything as like a player, right? Like, and there's and I think that looking back now, especially, if I could rewind, 23 years, I now have a much deeper appreciation for, what goes into coaching, as opposed to just being a player, right? Because in the environments I was in, I showed up and my coach had a training session and everything was set, or if we were setting it up with him, but at least there was a plan. And then anything that occurred, I was just a player. My job was to show up and sort of participate in the session. That's it. And I think that coaching is one of those vocations that, unless you've done it, it's like swimming. You can read a book about how to swim, but unless you're actually physically jumping in the water, it's a very different experience. And so that was my first foray into coaching. Was 2003, coaching the Union Hill High School girls program for 3 years. And it was a great experience for me as a coach. It was incredibly frustrating and nerve-wracking and anxiety. Because like my first practice, so there had never been a coach, there had never been a program prior to me getting there. The first like 3 weeks of practice, I had 3 girls show up, the same 3 girls. It took me 2 weeks to convince the girls not to show up to practice wearing jeans. And like it was sort of that slow, methodical, like, okay, well, do any of you have a friend that maybe would want to play? And slowly growing the program, finally wound up with like 16 girls on the team that first year. And it was a challenge. I think I'm not exaggerating. We lost our first game, like I think it was like 19-0. Like we just got absolutely just shelled. Because we were playing in a league where teams had like, not just, years prior, but they had, some of the towns surrounding us have like grassroots programs where girls have the opportunity to start playing at like 5, 6, 7 years old. So by the time they get to high school, they've been playing almost 10 years. And at the time in our city, that wasn't the case. So my girls who had never played before on an organized team were going up against girls that had been playing for like 10 years. And trying to get even the simplest things right across. But it made me such a better coach because I had to find similar ways of sort of presenting ideas, right? Like I said, coming out of college, like, okay, we're going to play an offside trap. All right, well, coach, what's offside? What are we doing? Like, is a trap allowed? I still remember a girl thinking that we were cheating somehow because I called it a trap. Like she didn't realize it was like perfectly acceptable. It's just a tactical way of playing. Formations, how many girls play on the field at once? You can't just sub in and out, like you have to wait for a stoppage, like all the things, right? And so it made me a better coach only because I had to reframe everything I thought, not just about the game, but about how I deliver the material, right? Like, so, getting the girls to understand, like, just, yes, you're supposed to stay in your position, but it doesn't mean you're like rooted or anchored to the ground. Like you can move about the pitch. Yeah. And it was great. It was a phenomenal experience. It took us, I think we didn't win our first 11 games. We won our 12th game. I still actually here. This is a picture. Here you go. So this is a picture that somebody took of me seeing my head when we finally won our first game. Because I was so incredibly happy. And it wasn't, it's not the wins and losses. It was, I saw how hard they were working. And again, for girls that they put all their trust in me, had no previous coach before that. And so like to see all their hard work, and they were really getting heartbroken with each passing game that we just weren't, and we got better. Like the first game, like I said, we lost 19-0. That was our worst loss of the year. Like, we kept losing, but we got a little bit better incrementally. And then we finally won a game 1-0. And I don't, that's probably honestly and I've won trophies with my other teams. I've won titles. That was probably my favorite win because it was starting from like ground level and then moving up to like actually being able to beat another team with a group of girls who just played their hearts out every single game. Regardless, we were playing, like I said, like it was hysterical to see, like we would roll out of the bus and I had girls with two different shin guards on or 2 different boots on or 2 different colored socks on. It was, and meanwhile the other team's coming out, everything's perfect, uniform, everything's set, like they're all like, they look like pros, and we look like a Sunday league, like a men's or women's team just showing up like, hey, who wants to play some pickup, and that was it. And but it was a great experience for me. I still keep in contact with some of the girls from that first team because again, it was my first opportunity to be put in that position. So that's where I started, and now 22 years later, still doing it. So it's been a fun ride.
It certainly has been, and we're going to unpack that even more as we continue speaking. Which, it's going to be great because there's so many different questions I have just from that. And I think one of the observations that I made just by listening is the fact that you have a squad there, and you have such an important role without realizing it at that time because that's the first time they're playing. They're coming together as groups against, as you say, well-established groups. So actually what they still take away from life, and even if some of them are still playing now, that it's been shaped by you and that experience. So actually, when you've gone in and they're turning up with, you know, different shin guards and they're turning up with different socks, actually it's that standard that you instilled with them. It's that education you gave to them about also tactical systems and frameworks and how they started to understand the game, and then they start to get game appreciation, and now they're watching it with their own kids or however old they may be now these days, right? Oh, actually I understand the game, and I remember doing that in a training session myself. Or I remember every time the trigger word of a trap now is said by a commentator, or I actually know what that means, so I'm really in a position to explain it really well. So it's that important role where you've had to shape them over that period of time, but also get them up to a standard to compete in that league against those teams who are well established, and that psychological and that player management that goes into it. Because as you say, losing 19 now might have deterred any girl from coming back the week after, and any player for that matter of fact. And you have to keep that energy going. You have to go through this very rough time of, you know, losses are coming. There's going to be a lot of head drops. There might be players not returning for training because they're feeling, you know, demotivated. They might be feeling low. Actually, what is the morale of the squad? How can I keep that going? And this process, I know as a coach, is going to take a year, 2 years, maybe 3. But as a player, are they going to know that? Do they have that resilience to go through it? Do they really want to endure losing those experiences? You know, other players, then the higher quality players of the team who might be competing, are they then going to be poached by other teams? And that's where the coaching and the management comes into it, and how difficult it is. And right now we have a girls team in the club that I coach. They've only been around for 6 or 8 months, and they've just started off the league. I think they're about 5, 6, 7 games in. But I was chatting to them on Saturday, and I'm scheduled to do a coaching session with them now in 2025. And I was talking to them, and they're saying, oh, we've conceded 49 goals already this year. And I think that's across 6, 7 games. And even then, I'm like, that is a lot of goals to concede, and there's a lot of pressure going on, but there is a big journey ahead of them. And that's one of the reasons that I can't wait to coach them. And rather than seeing, oh, did you know what? Oh, I've got this bad looking team to really coach after Christmas. Oh, they're conceding so many goals. Actually, what are the errors that you're making? What is it that we can improve? What are we not doing individually? How are we working as a team? So there's a lot of questions which I'm posing, and I can't wait to see an observation of one of their games to then go and as you say, reframe that opportunity and to look at scenarios during sessions. But when you look at reframing, right, and say it happens in one of your sessions tomorrow, you've seen a scenario that doesn't quite fit your sort of vision or the way that you want to deliver the principle as a coach. How do you then go in, reframe it, correct it, and then get the players to reenact the situation so they're learning?
I mean, for me, it doesn't matter. If we're talking about football, if we're talking about something I'm doing in my classroom, I always start with answering the why question. Like for me, that's massive, right? Like, why are we doing this? If we're doing an activity, if we're doing a drill, if we're doing a session and it's about defending in the middle third, whatever it is, I need to make sure my number one priority is making sure my players understand why we're doing what we're doing, right? Kids can sniff out pretty quick. Again, doesn't matter if it's classroom or on the pitch. If you're just kind of going through the motions, we're doing this drill or we're doing this activity because we've done it before. If they don't see a connection to what we're doing, they're going to lose interest real fast. Or at least that's been my experience, right? Like kids are a lot of things, but they are very quick to sort of sniff out, all right, is coach really just having us go through the motions here, or is there a reason behind it? So for me, that's the first thing. Like, maybe I didn't set up the activity or I didn't explain it well. So if I need to reframe them, I first look at myself always, like, right? Like, okay, how could I have presented this a bit differently? Right. And then, answering the why, and then who's in front of me, right? Like, what are the players? Because every single player, men, women, boys, girls, adults, like every person, every human being is different, right? And so if I present the same thing to you exactly the same way and I present it to someone else, it might work perfectly for you and they're confused, right? So I have to think about who's in front of me too, and get to know my players as best I can. I feel like that's such a not necessarily underappreciated, but I think that's a vital part of coaching is the more you get to know your players, right? Like the better I know you, the better I can help you, right? Like if we don't have a relationship, if we don't have a rapport, if I don't know you very well, then it's harder for me to get you where we need to go, right? So if I need to reframe something, all right, why are we doing this? Have I communicated that perfectly? Who's in front of me? All right, it's Luca. All right, Luca does well when I'm giving this type of instruction or if I'm presenting it this way. And then that bit of self-reflection on myself, like, okay, how could I, is there a way I could reframe it, just to help? Because to me, that's my role, right? Like helping you. We talked about before a minute ago about like the role of like high school athletics. Like I see, because I've worked in grassroots, I've worked in high school, I've coached at college level, I've coached semi-professionally. Like going back to that why question, for me, for high school, as a high school coach, my job is not to win every single game. And I know that sounds kind of ridiculous for a coach, but my number one job is, are you happy? Are you safe? Are you enjoying this? Are you learning like life lessons, things that are going to benefit you after you leave, right? Because that's, again, I see that more as sort of, yes, it's awesome and it's phenomenal to win every game you play and win a bunch of titles and trophies, sure. But I don't see high school athletics as being solely about that, right? Like we call, in here in the States, we refer to anyone who plays a high school sport as a student athlete. And we continually remind the players the student part comes first, right? Like, I don't care. And I have been in the position where I've had to remove incredibly talented players because they weren't doing the right things in school, or they weren't following the team rules or stuff. And again, like not, it wasn't like me flying off the handle. It was, the player had been given 7 opportunities, and we had meetings with the player and with the parent and said, look, they're continuing to fail courses, or they're not, showing up to training, or, we've had that communication. But that's, again, going back to the, what's our why? Why am I here as a high school coach? I want to teach you football. I want to help you get better as a player, but I want you to be successful after you leave me, right? Some of my best success stories are kids that were pretty terrible players, but are now doing really well in life, right? Like, or at least that's how I see them as success. Some of my best success stories, like kids who maybe were substitutes or barely played for me because they were, they were good kids and they worked really hard, but they weren't as talented as some of the other kids we had. But now I see them and they're a lawyer or they're a real estate agent and they sell $1 million homes, or I see them and they work, in other fields and they're incredibly successful. Like for me, I'll take that over winning a trophy like 15, 20 years ago, any day of the week, right? Because that's so like quick. It'd be nice if it's both, right? Like if you have a player who wins everything they play for and then is also successful. But obviously their success after school, like once they graduate, is more important to me than any single trophy they could possibly win.
And I think that's one of the most important things is, again, it links back to that work you had with those girls, and it's about what they're doing now and beyond. And it's that impact that you've had with them. And you could have said, yeah, we won a trophy and we looked at all those amazing moments, how we came together, that team unity, the success, the players scoring goals, getting assists, and all those amazing things that come with winning. But it's actually, how did we endure this situation in the toughest times? Actually, do I instill these life lessons with my kid? Do I do it with my family? Are we resilient through the most difficult times? Actually, how am I now a leader in work? How am I a team manager? How do I respond? Or how did Shap coach me back in the day? Actually, is there ways that he spoke to me that I could reframe the situation in work to overcome what might be a barrier to me? And that's still some of the situations that you may have with your players. Now, you might have a very good captain on your team, and they might be in a role where they come in and they're already directing other players what to do. Actually, some players might not respond to that. So actually, that's where a bit of coaching comes in. Is going right. Our communication, and as captain, you could ask them a question. You can take them to a side after training, and that's where your leadership develops as a captain, and it complements your actual principles of what you expect on the pitch and those players around you. But the 2 questions that I really took away from that was, first off, what life lessons do you want to instill in your players, and then how do you get to know your players in that situation?
I mean, for me, I think that I don't think it has to be mutually exclusive, right? Like I think as the coach, I can instill, working hard. Those hard work is a huge like tenet in any program I'm involved in. Like I want the players working hard, but also like we want to do things the right way and being fair and just and no excuses, right? Like a friend of mine, he uses it and I like it, like shut up, nobody cares kind of a thing. Like just like get on with it, right? Like yeah, like everyone complains or moans about the referee's decision or that's it. Okay, well just move on. That's it. Like, that's not, because again, and I tie that to sort of life things that they're going to see later on. There will be moments in your life outside of football or any other sport where there are things that are not fair that happen to you, that are done to you, accidental or on purpose. It's going to happen. And so I think it's more for me like helping my players get better at reacting to those moments. So for me, that's huge, right? Like, yes, acknowledge it. I don't want to dismiss, and downplay anybody's feelings. Like, yeah, you're upset. I'm, me too. But complete yelling and screaming, or like when I see coaches go absolutely mad at referees, or get a red card or get thrown out. It's like, I've never seen a referee get screamed at and then change. You know what? You're right. I'm going to change the call. Like, that doesn't happen, right? Like, be great, but it's not the case, right? So trying to get my players to recognize the value of hard work, trying to get them to understand that, there will be obstacles, there will be challenges that they're going to face. And it's more about how you respond to those challenges, right? Because everybody gets knocked down. I don't care what sport, what environment. You could be in the best program in the country, you could be at the worst program in the country. Like, how you respond to getting knocked down, for me, is much more important. Because no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, that's sort of like one commonality I think everybody faces. Like, everybody's going to face a challenge. Now, your challenge might be different than mine, but that doesn't make my challenge or your, like, either way, it doesn't make one better than the other. But I really try to get my players to recognize that. And by using football sort of as like an avenue to getting to recognize it. Like, we do routinely, I'm sure I'm not the only coach, but like, me and my assistant we'll call, like, we call them phantom fouls, right? So we'll intentionally call something a foul when we're scrimmaging at the end or during training that we know is not a foul. We're well aware, and the kids will start yelling and screaming and moaning and so unfair. Like, yep, I don't care. We're going the other way. And just because, again, I'm a big fan of, like, if I want my players to behave a certain way, I have to put them into situations where they can exhibit those skills, right? There's a famous coach here in the States, Ensign Dorrance. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he has a quote. I might be paraphrasing it here, but inspect what you expect, right? So if I expect my players to respond well when the referee maybe makes a questionable call, then I have to put them into situations during training where they get used to, okay, that's it. Nope, I can't slam the ball down like a petulant child. I can't yell and scream. Nope, well, that's it. I just have to move on, right? And I think that's one of the things I love about football so much, is that, our game is so fast and it's so full of chaos, right? Like, whereas other sports, again, not to downplay them, but there's timeouts, there's so many stoppages you can sort of collect yourself. Right? In football, that's not the case, right? Like, you get halftime. That's it. Like, there's really no other planned stoppage that's going to occur, right? Like, referee blows the whistle to start, and now my players are in sort of, I can watch them, but I want to, help them as best I can be prepared for those things. But going back to like an earlier comment, like, I don't think, like, so I mentioned before about my focus on, really wanting them to do well in life. I believe, just my personal view, like, I think that by doing all those things, the wins will come. Like, I don't want anyone to listen to this interview and think like, oh, this guy doesn't care about winning, or no, I'm very competitive. But I'm also, I try to be, and it's something I've had to learn to do as a coach, is like, try to learn, like, what's the bigger lesson here, right? Like, I could yell and scream and try to argue a call, but what kind of example am I setting to my players, right? Like, because if I'm asking them to deal with a referee's call maturely, but they see me lose my mind every time, the littlest thing, then what am I doing, right? Like, so I have to do that. So hard work, responding to adversity, being creative. I think that's a thing that we're sort of losing from football. Again, just my opinion. Like, I love when my players try something and are brave enough to try something. I don't, get upset. I don't get mad at them. And I try to let them to know that, like, try something crazy. Like, because, like, again, I love the creative nature of our sport. I don't want it to be very regimented. Like, we have certain principles I like to instill in the players and certain ideas and concepts we want to try. But I don't want to be like sort of that joystick coach where they have to do every single thing, like I was listening to an interview the other day, and somebody was saying that Van Gaal, when he was at United, like, wouldn't allow any of his players to shoot on their first touch. They had to take a touch first and then shoot. And I think he got into an argument with like Rooney, and then somebody else actually scored a goal. Like, I think United's my favorite team, unfortunately, right now, not doing so great, but I got into football, like I said, like mid 90s. So, Scholes, the Neville, like they were much better then. But Van Hall was so regimented, again, according to this interview, that somebody, who was it? It wasn't Rooney, it was somebody else. Somebody scored off their first touch and they won the game. And then the player came off the field thinking like he was going to get a congratulations from Van Hall, and Van Hall starts yelling at him, "I told you not to shoot off your first touch." It's like, first of all, he scored, and second of all, you're going to tell a forward not to shoot. Like, to me, that's absolute madness. I just can't understand. I mean, again, that guy Van Hall's a very successful coach, and he's been a pro coach for a long time. So I'm not going to say he's wrong, but that kind of approach doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Like, to be that sort of controlling of your player, I don't get it.
And I think that's the art of coaching, right? Because then we all start to unlock and develop our own philosophies, our own sort of frameworks. And it's when we do coach education, which we'll come on to later. And sometimes it doesn't sit with me when we're doing competency skills, right? And we're assessing coaches on that because we're trying to look for a framework that meets the national governing body standards. However, every coach is very different. And if we coached every coach in the same way, then we wouldn't have Mourinho, we wouldn't have Guardiola, we wouldn't have Van Gaal, right? So we wouldn't have all of these. So it doesn't align with me in terms of how I look at coach education in that way. But we'll catch up on that later on. But I really like that concept of phantom fouls and the way that you bring a real strategy around it, because A, it is a concept, but B, it actually does bring a real strategy in, because it allows you to look at your game management situations and allow players to look at how they respond, again, their communication, what their game management looks like, how they can overcome those barriers, what adversity is. So it does link in with that principle there. But we're also that creative side, and I always say to the players when it comes into it, is the fact that I want you to do this in training. Training is there for you to make that expression. It's there for you to get it wrong. It's there for you to try something new. Be as free as possible. I'm not going to have a go at it for you. I'm actually going to praise you for it, because this is where we are going to make mistakes. So if you're going to do it in a game, why not do it here in training? Why not go, I've had this idea overnight, or I've been dreaming about this for a week. Go and do it. I'm absolutely behind that 100%. But I really like the way that you say, we have situations, we just got to get up and move on past it. And I'm very much like that in my whole life, right? I'm like, oh my God, why was I angry about that? Why am I still holding a grudge a week later? And sometimes I completely forget why I've held it sometimes. But then a lot of people are like, how can you just move on past that? I'm like, do you know what? I just learned to switch off from things very quickly, because that moment in life earlier today, a situation affected me. I said, do you know what? It's not worth more than 5 minutes of my time. Am I going to go home and think on it that much? Probably not, because I know I've got other things which I can look forward to, like the podcast interview, like doing some research and reading later on tonight. Like, tomorrow's a new day, and I'm going to approach that situation in a very different way if I need to. But it doesn't stop me moving on with life. But I think that's a big skill people are missing, is the fact that they're holding on to something too much these days, and we're not actually just accepting it and moving on. We're over analyzing and overthinking situations because we think there's more to it, and it's not always the same way. And I know in sport we can reframe situations, we can put a lot of analysis on, and that comes to that Van Gaal, right, where you take that touch and then you shoot and then you don't, and then you recreate all of these because your analysis shows you and there's some of the things you're looking for. Well, actually, when you're in those moments, it's not always the same situation. Sometimes it's just natural for you to take that touch and then shoot, for example, or you get that touch and then you hit it first time. So for every player, they think differently. So that's where that art of coaching comes into, and that's where their creativity was. So a player might see the ball, bang, they've hit out a pass into the final third, they broke the line, and they've been very creative in the way they've done that because they've done it outside the boot, for example. Well, actually, what Shaq wants is for you to do it, take a touch, play on the inside of the boot, and play it on the floor rather than over the top. So we could have all these different intricacies which come into it. But I think there's a very important lesson which you're teaching the players is to be creative, and how they can move on past situations rather than being held back by what they face each day or each game.
Yeah, so I'm coaching now, but I'm also a director of coaching, so I oversee some coaches. And I think the same thing applies with the coaches I work with. Like, I have a couple coaches. This actually happened a couple weeks ago. I had a coach that was getting very frustrated at one of his players because his player kept trying to take somebody on 1v1 on the outside and kept losing the ball. Coach is very frustrated. So I pulled the coach aside after the game and I asked him, I said, let me ask you, in the last couple of weeks, how often have you worked like 1v1s in training? And he was like, well, I haven't. I'm like, well, that's kind of your fault then, right? Like, because again, going back to that Doran's quote, right? Like, inspect what you expect. Just like I want my players to react a certain way through adversity. If you want your player, and I asked him, I said, do you want your winger to take him out 1v1, or you don't? No, he said, yeah, I do. I'm like, well, what are you frustrated? Well, he keeps losing the ball. So how often have you worked 1v1s in training? Oh, I haven't really had time. I'm like, well, then that, you have, and I think that too often it's very easy. I've seen some coaches, it's very easy to point the finger at the kid. Oh, the kid's messing. Ah, kid's just not getting it. Well, but what have you? And again, going back to my first experience with coaching, like if I had looked at it like, oh, my girls that I'm coaching when I first started coaching, they're just not getting it. We keep losing. It's all on them. And for me, that's pretty much the worst thing you can do in many ways as a coach is sort of like just shift all the blame on them, right? Like my job is tell you. I look at my job as helping a player to be successful on and off the pitch, right? And if one of those things is taking somebody 1v1 on the outside, then I have to create some training activities that gives the player the opportunity to work on that skill and to get confident, right? Because like to your point before, like I want to see that kind of stuff in training. Like I've always hated, and now that I'm in the position where I could be in charge of like certain elements of coaching in a club, like the idea of touch restrictions, right? Like, oh no, you have to 2 touches and you have to give the ball. Why? That's not how our game is played, right? Like, so if you're never giving a kid an opportunity to touch a ball more than twice, I get the rationale. You want them to play it quicker, but I think that's a different conversation, right? Like one of the best things I think I changed up about my coaching behaviors years ago was instead of telling a kid a piece of information, I always ask them a question. So Luca's dribbling the ball and you hold on to it maybe a little too long and you don't play it. Instead of telling you to play it sooner, I'll ask, hey, Luca, can we play that sooner next time? And I found it just that sort of phrasing. The player becomes more like sort of amenable, like more accepting of the idea of, okay, yeah, maybe I'll try that next time because coach asked me, right? It's very easy to point your finger, do it my way, and I see a lot of coaches do that. But for me, I think you're going to get more, especially if you're working with, younger players, right? Like where you can't be that sort of, and again, I've never coached the professional level. I'm not going to sit there and subscribe what those coaches should do. So maybe that is, work, or that does work in some ways. But for me, I think, especially with younger players, not professional players, not Division I college players, right? Like you have to give the kids the opportunities to be creative, to try things. They're never, like they need, and you need to show the players that you have not only faith in them, but you're not going to lose your mind if it doesn't come off, right? Because it's most of the time it's not. They're going to try some crazy trick and it's not going to work, right? But again, like I think that if the players know that regardless if you try it or not, and they're going to play a lot more relaxed. And I found that no matter what age group or what level I've worked with, if players are relaxed, not indifferent, not that I want them to not care about it, but if they play more relaxed, play calmer, right? Like you're not so like on their edge, not so anxiety ridden, I think you're going to get more out of the players. And I think it's going to be a better experience for everybody involved.
And that resonates with me because a lot of what my job is asking questions around situations that have happened in a day, and I link that a lot to learning. I link that a lot to coaching straight away. So part of my job is I'm a coaching advisor and coach educator, and so I do a lot of what you do in terms of working with different coaches and helping them develop their sessions and their coaching curriculums. And I will go in and I'll observe sessions. I'll take sessions alongside them. I'll take sessions for them. But part of it is reviewing what they've done, but also going, right, actually in this situation you could have asked that question, you could have approached it a bit different. And this sort of sits with me in terms of a quote that I read the other week by Adam Grant, right? So he's an organizational psychologist, author and TED speaker, and it really allowed me to reflect upon the work that I've done with my students every day. So his quote was, once something comes natural to you, you often have a hard time thinking about it in original ways. Now for me that is so important because we actually, when we work with kids, when we're working with players, we expect them to do things straight away. And when we're expecting them to do things straight away, that's because we've already applied our own standard to it by our own experiences, which we have gone through, or the way that we already have seen players do it or other children. And therefore we have the expectation for everyone else to do it. But actually, this isn't the case because this might be the first time that kids have approached this situation. So they've never had that opportunity to respond in certain situations. They've never fully understood it. They never had the opportunity to ask questions. They've never had one-to-one conversations. So actually, it's how can we apply a little bit more time to it? And it certainly sits with that coach. He said when he's putting that blame on the players, as you said, you've spoken to him. And that made me really think about this quote about thinking in original ways, because he has that expectation of what he wants his players to do. Therefore, he's put the blame on them because he doesn't think that he can meet that standard in that session. Well, actually, it's because he's not thinking about it. All right, these players might be very new. I've never actually tried 1v1s with them, or they've never had this experience before. And that just really resonated with something that I read over the last couple of weeks. And I think it's a real important scope to the way that we approach things in coaching and going, well, actually, this player is new through the door. They've only been playing 6 months. So putting them in a 4-4-2 system, for example, they might never have played a 4-4-2 system. Their access to football might have just been, playing on the streets, and then they might have played some in-school football. They've been at a sub a couple of times. They've just been told, be up front, get the ball, be a nuisance up front. And they've never really understood the technical system behind it. So it's those original ways which are really important. I think it really related to that coach when you started to make that observation about what you saw or had that conversation with him.
Yeah, and for me, that's massive, because the area I'm in, it is a very inner city area. So, again, many of our players, especially at the high school program, they haven't played, to your point, they've played a lot of street football, but they haven't played a lot of organized, right? So certain things are very good. Like, we're typically, our players that are involved in my club in the city, and then also at the high school, very good technically sound players. But sometimes trying to get them to understand like the tactics or formations or systems or stuff, that's where they struggle, because for them, well, no, but I can just, go on the street and skin 3 or 4 of my friends and, and just make them look silly. But if you're talking about playing, more formationally, more positionally, and again, that's to my point before, what I was saying, like, I need to understand who's in front of me. Right. So I don't, again, like now I don't have to maybe tailor training sessions so much to like their first touch, because my player's very strong at that. But can we spend some more time working on positionally specific things if that's what the player needs, right? Like if the player needs a particular thing, as a coach, I have to create an environment where they're able to work on those things. Otherwise, what's the point, right? Like, if I'm not here to help you get better at something, and players are at different levels, right? Like, some of them need more than others in terms of what they need help with. Some of them, again, to use like sort of football as an avenue, sometimes their football playing ability is great, but all of their stuff outside of or off the pitch, right? Like, I'm sure you're familiar with too. Like, I have players that they're geniuses when it comes to the pitch. Like, they can do no wrong. They do everything, and then they step 1 foot off the pitch, they don't know what day it is, right? Like, they struggle with like even the simplest things. And so getting them to understand the value of, and I've had some heartbreaking moments where I've had players that had like college scholarship offers that could have played Division 1, but just couldn't get it done in the classroom, or couldn't meet deadlines. And for me, I look at that as kind of like a failure on me, like, or partially anyway. Like, what could I have done more to kind of help, prepare these kids? Because, again, in terms of their playing ability, it was phenomenal. But then being a person, right? Like, existing outside of, right? Because again, especially at the collegiate level, like, everybody in college is good, right? Like, they can all do that. Yeah, you have like marginal differences, and sometimes there's gaps between Division 1, Division 3, sure. But if you can't, like, collegiately, if you can't pass a class, if you can't do what you're expected of you as a student and as a person, coaches are just going to move on, right? Because it's a package deal, right? So for me, like, if I'm working with coaches, I'm working with players. If I'm working with students in my classroom, right? Like, I'm of the opinion that coaching is teaching, right? Like, I think that some people see coaching as something outside of teaching. I disagree strongly. I don't think there's a lot of different. I think there's more in common if I'm, teaching a classroom full of students, or if I'm on the pitch working with players. It's just sort of the content is different. That's about it, right? But are they learning? Are they engaged? Am I communicating? Am I meeting them where they're at? Am I helping them become better people? Am I sort of individualizing it based on who each person that's in front of me? I think those two have more in common. And I get it. There's some people who think, oh, well, you're a coach. You show up to a field and you drop a bag of balls and the kids are just kicking around. And listen, there are bad coaches, but there are bad bus drivers. There are bad cooks. There are bad everything. There is no, I hate when people say, oh yeah, but I've seen some terrible coaches. Okay. I've seen terrible everything. There is no profession in which everyone in the world in that profession is amazing. There's people who struggle. And so for me, I see them as one and the same. So I routinely will use classroom strategies on the pitch and coaching pitch strategies in my classroom constantly, all the time. I see them as linked.
And I'm completely with you there. And a lot of my work is focused around what you call restorative justice, right? And so in the coaches group the other day, one of the coaches texted in going, "There's two boys in my team. One boy is bullying the other. What would be the way to approach this situation?" So one of the other coaches text straight back going, "Well, this is the club policy. First off, then you would address it with the player." Then you'd have a look at the situation, see if it continues to persist. If it then persists, and then you start to ban them from the club. And I was like, okay, I understand that. And I understand the club's got a policy, it's got procedure, it's got a way of protecting the player. Actually, I think there's a lot of work which can be done in the situation before we actually get to the exit result. I was like, why can't we use restorative justice first? Why can't we approach each individual player? Why can't we then sit them down? Why can't we get it up in the air? Why one player is bullying the other, how the other player might be feeling in the situation? And actually, can a little bit more work be done rather than just going down the route of A, B, C, D, and then this happens? Well, actually, it's going to take a lot more time from you, but it's how about you have this communication? How do you ask these questions? How does this player feel about this? Why are you going through this? What are you experiencing? How has this led to a breakdown in our team? Actually, can we overcome this as a team? And then you might start to elaborate on some of the questions and going, well, actually, is this the team for you if you don't buy into our culture? And then if they buy into the culture, then you can have a discussion about their psychological understanding of the club. Do they understand the values? Are they bought into it? If they're not, how do they buy into it? So then that's where that coach education really comes in, is then how do you bring the other stakeholders, including the parents, on board? Now, bullying is very fickle, and there's a few different things from it, right? Where as a coach, you want to lead on that with your own team. Do you want another coach to lead on that? So actually, you could delegate that out to another coach who might have a different perspective where they don't really know that coach. So they might be a lot more open, or they might be closed, or you might be in there with that coach in that situation. But there is many different ways we can try to approach this rather than just banning the players straight away. So that's where those key questions come into it, and it really links into that framing that situation of that empathetic sort of situation and going, how does this player feel about that? And I said that's something that you can apply into your coaching as well. When players are responding, when they're getting those heavy losses, and understanding that they're together for the first time and playing these matches. So that real culture of player development comes into it. A lot more than just this bullying situation. And that's part of the real culture education that I'm bringing into the club, to really work with the culture, how we're bringing it together, and understanding that players are going through a journey. So you're almost marketing to the players, well, your first year is going to be a lot of losses, it's going to be difficult, and that's okay. And you really build that into them. But you're also building resilience, you're building hard work, you're building the fact they want to learn. Then year 2, you set another goal. Then year 3, they're only under 11s now, and under 12s, and then 13s. We're at a real good point then for when they're hitting 14s at a real competitive level. What are the lessons that they learned? How much have they built? And how do we evolve our tactical systems under 14s even further, and start to get that player IQ up, especially ahead of under 15, 16s, where they might be looking for scholarships, they might be looking for college programs, and then beyond 16, then if they stay on under 18s youth level, and then they might look at seniors beyond that. So there's a real strategic plan which I'm putting in place with these coaches, and there's a lot of work being done. But I think come back to that situation is about framing it, it's about that communication, it is about the questions, but we use a lot of restorative justice when it comes to these sort of situations.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a better way of approaching it, frankly, because I think the thing that resonated with me, what you said, was, it might require a little bit more work of the coach, but I think that that work is incredibly valuable, right? Because if not, if you're not recognizing that the players in front of you are also humans, right, you're missing a huge part of it, right? So I work with the city I'm in, very low socioeconomic rate. A lot of my players have a lot of issues that they deal with at home. Single parent households, not enough food on the table. Most of my players at the high school have to work a part-time job in season and be students on top of it, because they're helping to contribute money for rent or groceries or stuff like that. So I learned very quickly, and I've been, again, fortunate enough to be here for 22 years. So I learned very quickly that, yeah, my player, they might be behaving a particular way, or they might be exhibiting a trait I don't love, but I have to get behind the why, or have to, like, is this player in a bad mood because they slept 3 hours last night because they got home from work so late that they had to work on this project, that whatever it was, right? Like, it'd be very easy, like to your point from before, it requires a little bit more work and patience on the coach's point. But if I just you're 4 minutes late, that's it, and I go absolutely ballistic. But again, instead of having that conversation, well, why are you late? And again, there will be times where kids are kids and they're just showing up late because they're showing up late. But I think to write all the players off, well, without giving them an opportunity, for me, it's just too dismissive, and it's just not going to help them. Because again, I want to be the best part of their day, right? Like, I want I want my players happy that they're showing up to training, whether they're gonna, if they know, because kids are, like I said, they know, like, if a kid knows, well, I'm not a starter. I play a little bit, but I don't play very much when it comes to the games, right? Or I don't play as much as others, because football is a very popular sport in my school. And so, we have to have cuts. Unfortunately, we can't play everybody all the time. And it's a terrible part of coaching. But even those kids, like, that don't get to see the field a lot, I want those kids happy to see me and excited to come to training, because they know it's a safe space. Yeah, I might have screwed up, but Shap at least is going to give me an opportunity to explain myself. Because I think it's very, sometimes, a lot of adults, especially with the kids that I work with, like, I see a lot of adults not give the kids an opportunity. And again, sometimes the kids are wrong. I'm not just waving a wand saying the kid is always innocent and they didn't do anything wrong. No, of course not. They're kids. They're going to mess up. But I know in my life, I messed up a lot. And so the people that still sort of stand out for me, 30 years later, are the people who gave me the opportunity to sort of, yes, I messed up, but here's not excusing my behavior, but allow me to explain it, right? Like, I haven't eaten today. Like, the amount of players that show up to training for me that haven't eaten since the day before. And then, yeah, so you could yell at them and say, oh, you're lazy, you're not running as hard, or you're not doing this, or you're not sharp, or you're not being, right. But, as a coach, do you know the reason behind it, right? Are they not sleeping? They're not eating? Because we don't deal with robots, right? Like, we deal with people. And so every person shows up to the field with different, what were they going through an hour ago before they got to training? And if I don't take that into account, if I don't try to do it, and I get it, and that's why it resonated so much with what you said a moment ago. Like, yeah, that makes my job harder as a coach. It just does. Like, be easy to me. Nope. If you're, I'm going to treat everybody the same. I'm going to paint everybody with the same brush. I'm going to react the same to everybody. That's easier, right? I am a believer, though, in holding people accountable. And again, it's kind of weird, but like, some of these things, I know I don't see those things as mutually exclusive. I think you can hold kids accountable, or the players accountable, but then also treat them like people. Just like I want to teach my players life lessons, I do still want to win. I don't think it's one or the other. I think that sometimes people sort of frame that, or they think of that type of explanation as, oh, well, you're only teaching life lessons, so you don't care if you win or lose. No, I want to win. I work very hard, and I plan out training sessions, and I work with my assistants, and we sacrifice a lot of time to try to win as much as we can. But I also recognize that there's other things that are important. And it's the same thing, like, with, treating, I want to treat players to recognize that there are consequences to actions, holding them accountable, but also giving them the opportunity to explain to me what's going on. I think that's important, right? Because I really value, like, what a coach is in a person's life. I remember, let's see, I started teaching 2003. 2004. So the first couple of years of coaching football, I was also coaching wrestling, because, like I said, that was like one of my first sports. There was a player a wrestler who, he didn't live with his parents. He lived with his grandmother, and his grandmother passed away. And the administration at the school found out before the kid found out, because the police showed up to tell the administration. And I remember being there when the the police told the administrator. I'm sorry. I remember getting the phone call to come down to the office, me and the other coach, because we were the ones that were going to break it to the athlete that his grandmother had passed away, because he didn't have parents, or they weren't in his life, and he had no other family, and we were the ones that had the bond with him. And it was like, and when I asked the principal later on, because I hadn't made the connection yet, why I'm not, we're not the social worker, we're not the counselor, like we're not a minister. I'm just a lowly classroom teacher. I'd only been teaching for like 2 years at that point. But the principal had been a coach years before, and he said, "Well, no, you have a relationship with the kid. Like you're the one that there's no other person in this school that would from more than you and the other coach." And that was sort of a moment that really stuck with me, right? Mm-hmm. Because, and again, this kid was not a good wrestler. He was a, average at best, and but it was the fact that, I know that was just an example of like, I know the difference a coach can make in a player's life, for long after they're finished, in whatever respective sport they're doing. But I think that the things that we do, the interactions that we have, the lessons that we teach the players, matter a great deal. I know for me, like I teach in the same school that I coach at, and I know that there are players that listen to me a lot more because I'm a coach than if I were just a classroom teacher, because they see coaches as different as well. And so I'm very cognizant of like how important it is to be good at what I do and the value that my job sort of adds to the community.
100% agree with you, and I think that's the most important thing. There is you're telling that kid who had that connection with you at that time one of the most important and most toughest pieces of information that he'll ever receive in his life, and he's always going to have that with him, and he's always going to think back, the first time I heard my grandmother died was this, and this was the person to tell me. And that is so significant, because you might live your life, you move on, you coach 100 different players, you change career, you get married, you have kids, so life moves on, right, for you. But for this one kid, it is one of those capture moments, as I call it, because he's always going to have it with him. He's always going to remember that very little moment, and it might be very significant to him, but might be insignificant to other people who might have been in the room at that time. They've moved on with their lives, and those other moments are happening, so it's not as significant. But it's the way that you approach that which has that long-lasting effect, which is the most important thing within that. And I think that's the role that we play, which goes beyond coaching. It goes beyond who we really are, because we are an important figure to each of these individuals. But it's when you spoke about it, and I think it relates that we are coaches, we are teachers, we are psychologists, we are the carer of some of these players, we are the role models, and there is so many different roles which shape in terms of what we do. Now, when you were talking about your accountability, your standards, the way that we understand these players, I think that's the most important thing, because there's a lot going on in the background of their lives. Now, over the weekend, my football club were hosting a 24-hour football match, and we reduced it down to 12 due to the temperature drops that we're having here in the UK. So it was a 12-hour football match to raise money to fight hygiene poverty, because a number of these kids within their communities were struggling to have access to basic needs such as deodorant, toothbrushes, and these kinds of things. So we ran a 12-hour football match, which was to engage communities and to raise as much money so we can supply back to our communities. So where we take it for granted in some of our training sessions that kids are turning up in boots and their shin pads and things, actually what we're seeing in some of the other players where they might not be as affluent is the fact that they don't have the basic needs at home. So if they are late to training, we have that accountability and those standards of, right, you've been late X amount of times, and therefore you're going to start on the bench this week, or you weren't at training for the last 2 weeks. Or actually, they might not have been there because the parents gone, I can't afford the fuel to get you to training there this week, so therefore I've had to spend it on the basic needs, and therefore we're trying to hold them accountable. So I also see it in school sometimes, and I feel very conflicted at times, and it's a very hard situation for us to be in, because we have our standards, we have our principles. Actually, when you understand the people that's in front of us, and that's where the art of coaching, management, leadership, psychoanalysis, and all these different things come into it, is actually there's a bigger picture. And if we consider it, we're going against our principles, which is breaking our own internal rules, or going against it. But then we also have a level of accountability whilst understanding the person. So sometimes someone might go, from the outside, oh, you've broke your rule, you've gone against your principles, how can you instill it with this individual or this student? And sometimes it's a very difficult conversation, but that's where the education around that and that discussion comes in. But it's the fact that, you know, I've actually had to consider the needs of this kid this week. I've actually understood the fact they missed the last 2 weeks. He is one of our better performers. So, okay, this player's turned up for 2 weeks. Do I start this player who hasn't started over him? And that, again, that's where the management comes into it. But then you are conflicted in that situation to look at what the scenario and situational relationship and situational context was, whilst holding your standards accountable, whilst looking at your squad, but also considering at the heart of it the human which comes into it and what they might be experiencing and how we manage them, and to create those capture moments which live for them for the moment and for the long term. And that's where coaching comes into it. But we can feel so conflicted. Now, as a coach, do you ever feel conflicted? Do you ever feel that you're in those situations? And if you are, how do you deal with them? How do you set them so, right, these are my standards, but I am conflicted, but I uphold them? How do you approach that kind of situation?
Yeah, no, conflicted all the time. Yeah, because again, if you have a roster of 20 people in front of you, they're all going to be different. And yeah, you have standards, and we have team policies, and I don't like the word rules, but yeah, I mean, we have that. I always, and I have lost a ton of sleep over trying to figure out, what's my answer going to be to a particular situation. But ultimately, I always come down on, well, what's the best thing for the kid in the long term? And sometimes it means sacrificing the short term, right? And it's tough to get players to recognize that. Nope, Luca, I'm sorry. You've been given this many opportunities. You violated this many rules. You're not playing this weekend in the championship game. And that has cost me. I have made calls like that where, again, nothing is certain, but I've not played a player in big games and lost the game. And maybe I would have won if I had sacrificed my principles like in the short term. And then sometimes, to your point, sometimes it's but it is okay. Look, I know that I said if anyone misses a practice, they can't start. However, this player cleared it with me, or this is what happened. So I don't really believe in. I don't like having, and just the way I live my life. Like, I don't think the world is black and white, right? Like, I think there are shades of gray, and I think part of my job is making those tough decisions. But it's also, I think too, it's very important because I've seen how it can go bad. Whatever decision I make, I can't just be where I make the decision and I don't explain it, not just to the player, but to the whole program, like the whole team. Because if my players know, well, wait a minute, Shap, like you said that if you showed up late or if you were absent or whatever, then you couldn't start. And now you're letting Luca start. Well, I don't understand. Like, what is it? Right? Well, guys, Luca had a death in the family, or this, like, again, like sharing my explanation of it. And in the same way, in the other way, like, well, because I've had players that have come to me, not the player that messed up. I've had other players. Shap, we know Jonah got in trouble, but who cares? Let's just let him play this game because we're going to win and we're going to. No, here's why. So, for me, I kind of like to, have those team values, those principles, the things we want to do. But I have to also be, again, before, like, we're not dealing with robots. I'm not a robot. My players aren't robots. I have to sort of say, well, what's the overall situation? I also, I'm sure like yourself or anyone who's a coach, I don't think you can be a coach if you don't have a system of whether it's assistant coaches, mentors, like other coaches to sort of talk things out. Because especially, depending on your coaching context, it can be overwhelming. It can be exhausting. And I know that's one of the things I think that are the biggest changes from where I was when I first started coaching 22 years ago till now. Like, when I first started coaching, asking for help or advice or seeking out any sort of assistance, I viewed it when I first started coaching as like a sign of weakness, right? Like, I'm the head coach. I'm supposed to know everything. I'm supposed to have all the answers. Nope, I got it. It's all me. And then as I went, through my whole coaching journey up until now, I've sort of realized how just dumb that was. Because, like, if I wasn't, again, like, I'm a firm believer in, like, surround yourself with the best people, like, find good people and sort of gravitate towards them and bring them as close to you as you can. And giving that opportunity to sort of like talk things out. All right, guys, here's the situation. Here's where I'm at, but let me get, input from everybody else. because sometimes you'll have, hearing that, different point of view from other coaches or other people you trust their opinion. Because there's a reason why they're your inner circle, right? Like you have to be able to work together, right? And still recognizing that as the head coach or I'm in charge of the program. So, and that's a conversation I have whenever I bring on, like, say, a new assistant or I'm working with someone. I very much enjoy open communication, but I make sure that they recognize that doesn't mean I'm just going to do what you say every time. Like, I'm going to listen to you, but I still might disagree. And so we may go a different way. And I hope I still have your support. But I think that's a thing that you have to do is case by case basis. And then also, you know, allowing others to sort of weigh in and get some help. And sometimes it is, if it's not coaches, it's speaking to the captains of your program. Like there should be a reason why you make a player a captain. It shouldn't just be, well, I'm just throwing you the armband and you're the captain. Well, no, like I have picked this player for a particular reason, not giving them the final say, because I don't think it would be fair to put a kid in that position or a player, but getting their input, right? Closed doors, right? Like bringing in your captains. Okay, here's the situation. This is the player. This was the infraction. This is what happened. Same kind of thing. Here's what I'm at. Here's where you're at. And then I think too that that's a great assessment for you as a coach, because if you have sort of created an environment that's positive, that's the right way, hopefully those captains will give the answer, not that you want to hear, but their answer will align to the values you've tried to instill, instead of just like, yeah, let's let them play because we want to win. Who cares? Like, and if they, well, no, Shap, but we think it's more important for the program, right? One of the principles that I'm a huge proponent of is the we is bigger than the me, right? So who we are collectively is more important than any one individual. And so, if whatever we're talking about is better for the program, then that's ultimately got to be our decision, right? It might not be great for that one particular player or smaller group of players, but if it's better for the program overall, right? Because next year the program will survive, right? Like this player might graduate, like, or even if they're coming in and they're leaving in a couple of years, but they will. Like the program, it's more important to me that the program continues to succeed and do well as opposed to any one individual.
And so when it comes down to that, right, and I know you've got some experience in terms of player recruitment and looking at that talent ID and looking at that wider picture of things. So when it comes into that we over me, how do you assess and how do you recruit and how do you analyze a player that they're going to come in and they're going to contribute to that team environment as a we rather than those as individuals? Because as I see a lot of players pushing over X and looking at their profile ahead of their recruitment periods, and I see things that they're doing now. And over Christmas, you get to see them sharing, pictures of Thanksgiving and what they've done for Thanksgiving. I'm like, right, there's a lot of things behind that because there's gratification of what they've done. They're trying to push in terms of their community spirit and what they do. So that's trying to very much gear towards that recruitment piece and all about themselves. And there's rights and wrongs with it, however anyone looks at that, right? But it is about that individual and how they're trying to push themselves to create opportunities to get the space in the schools that they want to get into and all those things, right? But as coaches and as recruiters and as educators ourselves, it's sometimes really hard to look past some of these things, or sometimes it's really hard to really break down and analyze the individual that we're getting. And sometimes it's not till they come through the door and we're a month in, we start to realize a little bit more about them. And that's just part of recruiting, and that's the way it goes sometimes. But when it comes down to those things of yourself, how do you sort of analyze a player before you fully bring them on board into the school or the program or the club, etc.?
I mean, the first thing that matters to me, if I'm looking at like just from a player ID, because again, I'm wearing a lot of different hats, whether I'm a high school coach or director of coaching or the different programs I've worked with. I mean, the first thing for me is like your technical ability. Like that's where I start, right? Because I need to see that you're capable of performing at whatever level we're at. If we're talking about an under 8s team, an under 18 team, a collegiate team, whatever it is, like, okay, are you able to compete? Are you able to technically execute the things that I need you to do? Once that, then for me, it's a massive part of like, I look at, your teamwork and your team spirit and the little things, right? Like for me, that's massive, right? Body language, right? Are you again, if we're scrimmaging and you're off the field for a few minutes, are you engaged even when you're not playing? And are you cheering on the other players as well? Like, are you going to be a good teammate to have, as opposed to being, are you just a good player? Right? Because for me, and again, especially with our sport, I think our sport is the ultimate team sport, right? Like, where, it's not like other sports in that, if you have one good, I know a really good, one of my close friends is a high school baseball coach. And in this area, and I can't say that it's the true for the world over, but in the high school baseball context that he's in, he has routinely told me, if you have a good pitcher, you're going to be good. If you have that one good player, if you have a pitcher that is very, very good, you're going to be very good, because so much is riding on that one position, that if you don't have that position, you're not going to be truly, truly great. For our sport, I think that you need both, right? Like, you don't play, like some sports, some of the players play attacking and some players play defense. We do everything, right? Like, every player, and that's how I view the players. Like, we're all going to defend, we're all going to attack, we're all going to do work together. So outside of the technical ability, then I want to see what kind of teammate you are. And then the third thing, I think, and it's probably the equally as important as the other two, is what kind of communicator you are. Not just are you loud or are you vocal? Because I've seen players that just say things to say things. And I see coaches that do the same thing. They just yell out words, and that's not communication, right? For me, communication, especially on the pitch, is selecting the right piece of information to give and when to give it. It's easy to point something out after an action has happened, right? Like, oh, you should have done this. You should have, like, in the past tense, like that to me, that's not communication. And then if you're just yelling and you're not really giving up a ton of like good quality information, that for me, that's not. I think that's some players I've seen. That's a way for them to sort of like pretend like they're good communicators, right? They're constantly saying words, right? Like, they're not really giving a great piece of information, or they're not helping, right? Like, I always go back to when I work with players, especially younger players like 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. Sometimes they'll just be like, Luca, Luca, Luca. They'll just say a player's name 8 times in a row and not, Luca, turn, 1-2, play to the corner, in the inside, I'm split pass, whatever. Like, give them a piece of information, right? But trying to get those players to understand, just saying a player's name over and over and over and over again, that's not, you're making noise, but that's not really communication. And I look at those 3 things as sort of like, then how do they extend out? Like, because if you're a good communicator, we can have a conversation. We can talk about how the team wants to play, or where I see what's your role going to be in the team, right? Like, if you're not a good communicator, both ways, right? Like listening and speaking, it's going to be a challenge. The technical ability, again, is more about like, are you the right fit for, the context we're looking at, right? Because if I'm putting together an over 30 team and we're just getting together to have fun, your technical ability, whatever, we're just getting together to have fun. But like I said before, like, I had an opportunity to coach like a semi-professional team, or be one of the coaches on that. You had to play at a certain technical level to be able to compete at that. And we had tryouts, and we had players, and we had to make cuts. And it was, that was a major thing, because if you can't physically do what we need you to do, it's tough to do it. So for me, the context matters a great deal in terms of what I'm looking for the player.
And I think it's important to really look at our values alongside that, in terms of how they're going to fit into the team, what we expect as coaches. But it's unpicking the things that we really want to see, rather than going, right, yeah, they've ticked that box for communication. Actually, now I've analysed it with my assistant coach. Their communication isn't what you had that perspective on. The communication is the fact that I want that extra level of detail. I want to get that in. But actually, there's an opportunity. If I see a player there, they're very good technically, so there's a piece of our work there to do with them. So I'll notice if they come in and sign for us and they're part of our team, actually that's where the level of work comes into them. How can we educate them? Is that the bit of the game where they miss in, where they've had gaps through their coaching over the years, and perhaps a level of coaching that they've received in terms of what comes with it? But from your different coaching experiences, you've talked about coaching at school, you've talking about semi-pro, you've spoken about college levels and grassroots and all these other outlets. What has been your most favorite sort of environment to be in from your experiences?
I mean, coaching at the high school, I think for me has been my favorite because one, again, being a high school teacher, I mean, I enjoy working with students all day, so that's for me. But then also, as I said at the beginning of the interview, like I really enjoy a challenge because for me, for high school athletics here in the States, you have to constantly rebuild and reevaluate and reflect upon your team every year or two because it's not like in a club. I've worked in club as well. Like if you're looking for a very particular type of left back, right, or center defensive midfielder, you can go out and recruit specifically that type of player you're looking for and look to attract them to your club and bring them in. High school, like I am as a high school coach, I am constricted to I can only use players that live in Union City, New Jersey. That's it. And that's all I'll ever do. I can't, we're not allowed, we're not permitted, and I wouldn't do it anyway. Nope, these are the that city. I'm going to find the best 20 or so players to build a team. And so for me, I love a challenge, right? So, okay, this year we're going to play in a 3-5-2. Nope, we're going to play in a 4-2-3-1. Nope, we're going to play in a 4-4-2. Nope, we're going to play a 4-5-1. Because again, that's sort of my favorite part is during the preseason is figuring out, okay, I've identified the players that are the 20 best players that we have. Now, how are we going to play? Because this year's group of 20 is different than what I had last year. Maybe some of them have remained, but you lose to graduation or kids move or there are things that occur where, okay, it's not the exact same 20 year after year. So if you're asking me to pick one, like what's been my favorite, I think it's that. It's constantly changing. It's a challenge. It's exciting. I live in Union City. So I live in the city where I work and teach and coach. So, and since I've been here for so long, I've coached a couple of, like I may have coached you and your older brother and and your cousin and the community aspect of it. Our field, like the facility we use, is right smack dab in the middle of our city. It's like a block away from my house. So like, the amount of people that turn up to our games or people that'll show up to a game that played for me 15 years ago, and now they're showing up with their son, like to do that. And I love the community aspect of it as well. And then being able to see these players come in as like 13-year-old, teenagers as freshmen, right? And then when they're, walking across the stage of graduation and moving on to college or work or military, or whatever it is, to see that kind of growth too. I think it's just a really exciting time. And it's a lot of fun to see how much, the players, change in such a short, 4-year period.
And part of that gives you your ongoing coach development and experience as well, because you said there and playing in lots of different systems, and you might have had 5 years in a row where you played 4-3-3. Now suddenly it's a time where you have a load of different players. You're like, actually, I want to fancy playing a 3-5-2 this year, and it's just where you've actually adapted each different year. It's actually allowed you to understand more systems, the way that players work. So it gives you a better opportunity to work with those players, and they get the better opportunity of getting a well-rounded chap who can play in different systems and understanding, right, I'm going to be flexible this week because the last 2 weeks we played this way. It isn't slightly going the way I want it to. So actually, can I identify where we've got a set of players we need to change formation to benefit them? So that's the very exciting thing that comes with coaching and the things that comes into it. But I've been in those sort of situations where I've had very different experiences, from grassroots to academy level to working at under 18s and with seniors, and linking at the male game and the female game at senior levels as well. And I've done talent ID, I've done high school coaching. I've got a very various experience of all these things. And sometimes I'm in one area one week and I'm like, do you know what, I really love this. And then the next week I'm like, I really love that. And I love that one over that one. But it's great because I've got all those different experiences. But now I'm doing a lot of coach education. I've always loved that opportunity to work with coaches and identify how they can improve. And I suppose that fits in a lot with being an educator and teacher myself day to day. But as you're a coach educator and you're director of coaching and you get to work with those different coaches and individuals and get to see them grow, does a bit of you feel that you're enjoying the coach development more than coaching sometimes, because you can bring yourself away from coaching and look at how other coaches are coaching?
I mean, it's a great question. I think I love both of them equally. I mean, there's nothing better than being on a training session, being on the pitch and working with players. It just isn't. But at the same time, I love coaching education. I love learning stuff. And you're right. I think it's mainly because I'm an educator. But like for me, like I have a lot of like soccer related tattoos, and my most recent one is learning never stops. I just got this a couple weeks ago because it's my favorite educational quote. I have advanced degrees from U.S. Soccer, United Soccer Coaches. I was over in Scotland last December to do my UEFA C. I've applied. I haven't heard back yet. I'm applying to become an educator for the Scottish Football Association. Like, I love learning. I'm never going to stop. Obviously, I'm married. I have 2 daughters. I know at some point I'm going to stop coaching because it takes up a ton of my time, my life. And my wife is incredibly understanding, and my kids as well, because obviously I wouldn't be able to do all the things that I do if not for them. But I kind of love both equally, because I think that I don't ever want to stop evolving as a coach, right? Like, and never, right? Like, I know I'm a very different coach now than I was when I started 22 years ago, and I don't want that to ever stop, right? Like, I want to be consistently a better coach. I want to learn, I'm constantly looking for what else can I do to get better as a coach. Because for me, because of the chaos, that's sort of the beautiful chaos of our game, I don't think it's possible to learn everything there is to know about it. Like, I don't care what level you're at. You could be a professional coach for 30 years. I don't think you've learned everything. And so I want to continue to challenge myself to keep learning. It started, I've always felt that way, but back in 2018, I actually had to step away from being the head coach of the high school program because my wife got an incredible job promotion. And so I had to be more of an assistant. I had to kind of step down because I just didn't have the same amount of time that I did previously. And that sort of inspired me, like, okay, well, I can't be there all the time, but I can get better as a coach. So I applied and was accepted into Ohio University. Has a master's degree program in soccer coaching. It's a soccer specific, like, graduate school program that I completed and got my master's from them. And then all the other coaching education I've talked about. Like, right now I'm reading like 3 different coaching education books, like, just in rotation, not all at once, because that's impossible, but like, I'll read one for a bit and then put it down and read another. Being on this podcast, like, everything I can do to make myself, because again, like I said before, like, I don't think I'm only getting better as a coach. Like, I've learned plenty of things in a coaching education course that I apply to my classroom teaching, right? Because again, I see them as linked. So for me, that's very important. Like, I don't ever, honestly, my wife has asked me previously, like, when am I ever going to stop coaching? And I don't know if there's an exact answer, but I think if I ever felt like, well, I don't want to learn anymore, I think that would be time to, like, hang it up. I think at that point I'm like, okay, but I love reading new ideas and learning new ideas and talking to coaches from different backgrounds and, like, meeting people who have an entirely different point of view about our sport. Because for me, again, that's, it is truly the world's game, right? Like, I have a lot of friends that are American football fans, and we constantly are bickering with each other and, what's the better sport. But they don't have that same sort of, like, apart from the States, not a lot of American football teams in the world. So, they don't have that. Whereas I'll go, like, the United Soccer Coaches Convention in January out in Chicago this year. I'll be going out there. There'll be 10, 15,000 coaches from all over the world that will descend on this convention to sort of just talk about football for like a week. And some of them will be from Canada, or some will be as far away as like Australia, and they'll fly in, and to be able to sit down and have a coffee with somebody, and talk about, well, what's football like with you and what's it like with me? And, like, what can I steal from you and what can you steal from me, kind of a thing. That's the beauty of it, right? Like, you can go anywhere in the world and you'll find a football match. It doesn't matter where you go. It's just the universality of our sport is amazing to me.
And I think that's the thing that I love most about it. And that's one of the reasons that I'm so lucky to speak to individuals like yourselves, especially across the waters, and understanding the way that you look upon the game. And the more and more that you talk about things, right, is the more and more that I take an understanding, different learning away from you. So, like, you got that convention in January. I see these as like mini conventions because I get to learn from you every time you go out to these different types of conventions and the way that you learn. And so, for example, like Andrew Dorrance, right? He's a name which has regularly come up over the course of the podcast. So it's something that I'm recognizing and understanding more and more. And it's great because I get to learn alongside what I get to do every conversation that I have. So it's great that I take these things away, and I love getting the different quotes from people and understanding what they bring into their program. So, like, one of the notes that I wrote down was just your phrase of phantom fouls, right? And now that is something that I've not ever heard that be described as. So that is something where I'm like, right, that is something which I might start applying into my training sessions. But as you're saying that, I'm like, oh my God, I'd never give fouls in my training sessions, because I'm delivering a training session the other week and one of the players has gone down and the other player is screaming, he's foul, foul, foul. I'm like, this is one of the things you have to get used to. I will not give you fouls in that training session because my expectation is that you pop straight back up, you win that ball back as soon as you've lost it, for example. And I think they're just little life lessons that I start to instill in players and expectations. But there's that sort of tweak where I get to frame those situations and actually throw that in. So over the next few weeks, as I take that out, I'm then going to throw it in, and they're going to be like, rah, rah, rah. I'm like, now you're starting to learn that the referee won't always give something, but when he does, you're not always going to go with it either. So I think there's a real piece in terms of how you bring that together. And the convention always looks like a very exciting place to be, an exciting time. But I think that's the important thing as well. When you said the moment that you feel that you're no longer wanting to learn is the moment that you step away from it. And I think that's where you have many different situations there where you could be like, right, I'm not enjoying coaching on the grass anymore, but actually I get to work with coaches, get to advise them, I get to educate them, I get to apply all my experience. And that's very different to being on the grass. So I get that experience. Or I might just go to a recruitment event and look at how other coaches recruiting, how they take those observations. So you might step away altogether, or you might go, actually, there's a little bit of me which still has a year or so to give. Then you go on, you know what, I've done a bit of that, but I am totally done with it. I think that's when we truly have to understand ourselves is what else is going on in our lives. And the same for players, where we might actually take the tough decision to step away, but there's actually something else really exciting in my life that I am stepping away for. So whether that's to be with my wife a bit longer, whether that's to see my kids grow up and now they're getting married and having kids, or we get to do the things where we take family vacation, there's other things going on in our lives which is important. And that fits into the piece where we're understanding the lives of our players and the humans that we got in front of us by working with them every day and what we put into them.
Yeah, and for me, I look at coaching education a lot of ways as sort of like refilling my cup or like recharging the battery, right? Because doesn't matter how successful you are, like coaching, regular season, like is exhausting, right? Like you get to the end and you're like, wow, like what, and even if things went well, but like sort of maintaining that high level of success or winning every game or whatever it is, like it's going to take a toll. So having an opportunity to go out to the convention or take a course, or even like, there's and again, that's the beauty of sort of technology, right? Like you're in Wales, right? And I'm here in the States, and like we have the opportunity to share like this is like, awesome. This is incredible for me. Like, just that, jumping on a webinar, looking at a YouTube video, and yeah, like there's going to be some stuff like, I might see a YouTube video and it's not great of a coach presenting, but I think anything, if you frame it the right way, can be a learning experience. Like I tell people all the time, like I've had bad coaches, like as a player, I've had coaches that were just bad, that were terrible, but I've learned from them, like almost in a sense of like what not to do. Right. Or, and again, and maybe a lot of it's opinion and like, oh, well, I wouldn't do it that way. But I think that you can, right? Like, like there's that old adage, like you learn more from a loss than you do a win. And like, I think to me, that, again, sort of like, how do you choose to frame it? Right. Like I've seen, meetings or professional development or workshops or things where maybe I would have done it differently. I didn't think it was great, or if I've had a bad coach. But how can I apply that to my own context? Because I've never, I don't care what organization it is, I've never taken a course where I couldn't take something from it. Maybe I didn't agree with everything. Maybe there was one moment where, oh, you know what? This is a great piece or a great activity. And for me, like you kind of have to be a creative thief to be a good coach. I think because again, you can look at all these different ways. If I come watch a session that you're running, you may coach, a particular moment in the game or a particular skill completely different than I would. That's not to say one is right or one is wrong, but if I see one thing, and I promise I would from anybody, one glimmer, oh man, creative thief, I will come in and I will snatch that one thing up. Because again, learning never stops, right? Like I'm very much a growth mindset person. Like I want to continue learning, getting better. So if I watch a 2-hour presentation and for an hour and 59 minutes it's terrible, but there's one good minute, for me that's worth it. Because I'm now 1 minute better at myself, right? And you string a bunch of those together and all of a sudden, you're a much better coach at the end than when you were at the beginning.
And that's where that importance of framing that comes from, right? In the way that you put that together. And I'm nodding my head as I'm listening to you because it is very exciting the way that you put that together and the way that you talk about it. And I think that's a very important thing, right? In terms of how we think about our own situations and the way that we educate ourselves and the way that we understand situations, and then looking at that originality of it and then applying it in especially when we have so many new players coming through the door and we know that we have to readapt every year. That can also be a very tough thing as well, because as much you're having to change your systems, you're having a lot of new players come through every year. You're then sort of readjusting. So it's also energizing, but then it's also having perhaps a daunting effect at times because you have to keep refreshing yourself. And that takes a lot of energy and that takes a lot of learning. That takes a lot of application. So over the time, you've been coaching 20 plus years, for someone, as you say, put into your quotes, right, someone getting older, you're looking pretty good for someone your age and that consistency of coaching over 20 years, right? So, it does come with that, and that is part in hand. And I think sometimes when you're talking now, like, do you know what, he's had consistency for 20 years, he's done this, and this, he's still got this passion, he's still doing this in the classroom, he's combining all these things, he's got a family, he's got traveling, he's got other responsibilities as coaching other coaches, he's recruiting, he's then getting involved in a Scottish FA. I'm like, this guy's incredible, right? He's got a lot of things going on, but I think that's the passion. And when you said surround yourselves by those people, that's why I love having these conversations and just feeling invigorated myself by after coming off. I'm like, you know what, I spent it was late on into my night here in the UK, I'm back teaching first thing in the morning, but I actually really enjoyed last night. Even though I took up the majority of my night, I think it was well worth it. So I'm happy to give up those nights. I'm happy to have these conversations, happy to fit them in, because at the same time I'm getting that passion, that learning at the same time, and taking a lot away. But I think it's that continuous application of ourselves where sometimes as coaches we put a lot of pressure on ourselves and we hold ourselves accountable to our own standards, and that can be really difficult. But as someone who has all those different things going on in his life and still seeking to get involved in other things further and further, how do you switch off from those accountabilities? How do you just break away and sometimes just breathe and relax?
So I had a professor in the Ohio master's program, Dr. Stephen Harvey, and he taught a course. To be honest, I don't remember the name of the course, but there was a whole section of it that dealt with like coaches' well-being. And so this was 2018, and so at that point I had been coaching in some capacity for 15 years, and I had never once thought about my own well-being, or at least I never consciously sort of thought about it. And to me, it's massively important now, right? Like, I can't believe it. And it's one of those things, like such an epiphany moment. Like, how did I not realize? But again, you're so like, again, and when I tell people sometimes that I'm a director of coaching and I coach New Jersey ODP. So it's like an Olympic development program, and then all the different things I do. And sometimes people, and I'm also a classroom teacher. They're like, wait, you have a full-time job on top of First and foremost, and again, I can't say this enough. If not for the support of my wife and my kids, none of what I do would be possible, because again, they're incredibly understanding of everything I want to do. But I think it's because my wife, I mean, to your point, what you said before, like my wife sees how passionate I am about not just coaching, I just education and learning and just improving myself. But I think that certain I'm that course I referenced a moment ago. Dr. Harvey talked about what's one thing you can do every day to work on your own well-being. And so every day since 2018, however many days ago that was, I set aside 1 hour a day to throw on my headphones and listen to a podcast or listen to music and go for a walk for an hour. Every day since I've not missed a day in, what is that now, 6 years. Because I said, you know what? No, like this. And number one, I lost a bunch of weight. But then number two, I'm like the stress, whatever, like just to not think about anything, just to go out for a walk, not to, I need to go to the store. No, just go for a walk. And I've had to be creative sometimes. Like my daughter, she's an athlete. She doesn't play football, unfortunately. She's a cheerleader though. And so sometimes she'll have her own training and I'll just walk around the field for an hour while she's, because again, as a dad, you have to learn, okay, how can I multitask? How can I figure all these different things out? And then when I'm away from it, right? Like, so, my father-in-law lives in Spain. So we went to Spain for holiday back in August. And yes, I checked out a couple of stadiums and yeah, I saw a game or two. Yeah. But at the same time, when I was like at the beach with my kids, my phone was off. I wasn't answering emails. I was being a dad and swimming in the ocean with my kids. Right. So I think that too is something that's not often considered, especially with coaches I see like that work at a really high level, like Guardiola scratching his face the other day, like how, like, and again, I can't even begin to imagine the level of pressure that guy's under, or someone who's a professional coach, or even like, again, context matters a lot. Like a Division I college coach that, man, if I lose this game, I'm going to get fired and me and my family and I are going to have to relocate. Those kinds of stresses, like they take a toll. Right. And I think you have to find something to switch off. But I think too, I still enjoy pretty much every aspect of the game. Being a coach, right? Like working with players, designing curriculum, taking course. I enjoy I enjoy it. So my comment before about, if I ever stop learning or stop wanting to learn, then I'm going to give it up. I think the same would ring true if I ever stop enjoying it. Like not every single second, having a crushing loss or something not going your way or something not working out. Sure. Right. Those are the lows. But I think those make you appreciate the highs even better. Right. Like, when you're training and it's not going great earlier in the season, but then you see a moment, it doesn't even have to be a winning. Like I've seen some of my fondest memories or looking back, like having a player that couldn't cross the ball with their left foot and working with them for 2 years on it. And then eventually they hit the perfect cross. And even if the person who received the cross missed the goal, I don't care. Like that, the cross that I've been working with this kid for 2 years, that suddenly he was able to do it. Like for me, that was a win, right? Because I know that kid couldn't do that before me. Right. So in a weird way, I don't want to say it's selfish, but like, it's also too, like, I really very much enjoy working with coaches, working with players, being involved in the game. And I'm a like absolute carnivorous, like I watch football constantly. I'm reading about it, studying it, listening to podcasts, like just I really truly enjoy it. I know some people, I have friends that coach and when they're not coaching, they couldn't care less. They're like, nope, I don't watch it. I don't watch it. And again, that works for them. But for me, I enjoy all the parts of it. But then too, when I do step away from it, it's like my hour walk, like I'm not doing anything football related. It's put music on or put a podcast on, but not a podcast about necessarily football or something. Or, just be, present with my kids or, with my wife or something, like, so then that way it's not, not the only thing. Cause I think that too, you have to sort of step away, from it. Otherwise you're just going to slowly drive yourself mad. Right. So yeah, having everything in moderation, I think, is important.
And I think that's an important lesson and insight for any aspiring coach or coach who would be listening to this, for example, because there's a lot of late nights, there's a lot of early mornings, a lot of traveling, there's a lot of analysis, there's emails, there's phone calls, there's texts, there's how we overthink, how we overanalyze, there's our own analysis of things, and we put our own coach education in it, and sometimes our well-being becomes last on the list of things that are in front of us. But it is about switching off, whether it is for that hour, whether you're just going for a walk, whether you're just going to go to a restaurant with a friend of yours and just chat about anything other than your job, and just grab some food, go out and do something different. Right, I think they're the most important things which really come into consideration. Now, Shat, when you sent me your CV, right, and I really wanted to frame this question in a way where you wouldn't be going, oh my god, what a weird, strange guy, right? But where you lived was just on the top of it, so I thought, I'm going to put that into maps, just have a look at the area where it's from. And I love America, right, and it absolutely like boom, guess me, right? My best mate lives out in California, and he's recently just been over from the US, and I couldn't wait to talk to him more about the US. And one of my other best mates lives here. He's like, "Why have you got any interest in the US?" I'm like, "Oh my god, mate! Like, what doesn't interest you about the US, right?" I'm like, "It's insane." So, you're living in the New Jersey area, right? So,
Yeah.
even when I pull up the map and I just zoom out of it, I'm like, "Oh my god!" Like, he's not far from like the Museum of the City, New York, right? And
Right.
even for you, right, these are just common things. But for me, as someone who's never been across New York yet, and looking at all these different places, I'm like, right, oh, he's got the Liberty State Park over there, he's got the Red Bull Arena over there, and just like Yankee Stadium, the Bronx, like
Yeah.
Harlem, right?
Yeah.
And these are just incredible places, right? But one of the places, and please correct me on my pronunciation of this terrible pronunciation that I'm going to give you, right?
Yeah.
Secaucus, Secaucus,
Sea caucus.
Secaucus.
Yeah. Sea caucus. Yeah.
So as I zoomed out, I looked at that. I'm like, oh my god, I wonder whether he actually knows a previous guest who's been on the podcast. So this is Coach Dominique Ocello.
Yep.
I don't know if you know her.
Yeah, coaching. She coaches at Memorial. She's in our conference. We play her 3-4 times a year. You actually had another one of my closest friends. Like, honestly, we were separated at birth, even though we weren't. Dominic Rutan. He's from Virginia. But he's the one how I actually originally found your pod, because he posted that he had been on it. And I was like, oh yeah, this is so crazy. And like, but I think too, like, coaching is so much your network, right? Like who not just who you're surrounding yourself with, but who do you become a friend with? Who do you meet on these courses? Who do you meet on these calls? Who do you listen to on one of these podcasts? But yeah, no, Coach Ocello, her school and my school are about 10 minutes apart from each other. Yeah, so it's right there.
But pretty cool, man, because like you've just mentioned Dominic as well. And I was going to ask you, because you had the United States coaches on your badge there. I'm like, he's become an educator for them. And as I've seen over his social media posts over the last year, and has been doing a lot more with them, I thought, I wonder if Shap knows him, right? So even though I'm abroad over here, it feels like I am some way connected to all these American coaches in the way that they're connecting. And I think that's the most incredible thing. And you know, when you're looking at what's out there and the way that the growth of it is coming together and all these different things, I think that is the most fascinating, sort of conversations that I have, where I speak to you, someone who's not far out from New York, and then I talk to someone who's up in New Jersey, where you're at, right, Long Island, and those different areas, and then I go and talk to someone who's out in Pittsburgh, and then how different that is then compared to someone that I speak to up in Detroit. And then you got people in Kansas City, Los Angeles, and as I'm speaking to all these different coaches, I'm then sort of engaged in different parts of the US. And when my friend brought his girlfriend over, who was born in America, and I'm quizzing here on America, I'm like, "Do you know this state? Do you know this high school?" And she's like, "No." I'm like, perhaps she doesn't, because she lives in this state, and this is very unique to that one state for her, right? But it's so cool when you talk about these different things and different places. And but what is the one thing that you love most about American sport and American soccer and football, in your case then?
I think for me, it's that we're still, and again, I have friends in that I've gotten to know over the last couple of years from Scotland and other parts of the world. And America, we're not very good at soccer, and it's not. We're still relatively new to the sport, right? Like, I think that where people are so, like, I was at, and again, I'm older. I was at the very first MLS game at, that when the that was held at Giant Stadium. So it's about 15 minutes from where I currently live, between the New England Revolution, and back then it was the New York, New Jersey Metro Stars. So now it's the New York Red Bulls. They've changed their team name. But in my lifetime, I have seen the first real professional soccer specific league in my country. There's not a lot of people alive in Wales, in Scotland, in England that were alive when their professional leagues, right? Like, I think the FA Cup started 250 years ago. Like, so for me, the most exciting part is that I'm a part of something when we're still sort of in our infancy, right? Like, yeah, listen, we have a long way to go in terms of where it's at. But for me, that's exciting. And also the fact that, to your point from before, is I'm not surprised that your friend's girlfriend hadn't heard of other schools, because that's the one thing I think of, like when I was over in Scotland, and we were talking to some people there that were from the area. We were right in Edinburgh, and we were asking a question about, I think we were going to go out to dinner that night when the course was finished for the day, and they said, "Oh yeah, well it's a pretty far drive." Oh, how far is it? And they were like, yeah, like 35, 40 minutes. I said, my friend, I wouldn't even be out of New Jersey in 40 minutes. Like it takes 2.5, 3 hours to drive from one end of New Jersey to the other. So I think the vastness, right? And how different football is in New Jersey as opposed to Pennsylvania, California. So, and that can get, frustrating at times, right? There are times where I wish like, okay, can we be more like sort of, like the German approach where everyone is pulling in the same sort of structured, way. And there is some advantage to that. But I also I'm a big believer in like pluralism, right? Like the idea that it's okay to be accepting of more than one idea in general, not just with football, but just in life. So I kind of love the fact that, I live in a country where there's a lot of different approaches to it. Because I relate it back to football. There's more than one way to play it, right? Like, there's some, coaches that I've had that have been like, oh no, we're going to hit the ball long every single time, regardless of the situation. And then there's other coaches who play it short, and they're both right and they're both wrong, right? Like there's more than one way to do it. There's no one scripted way. And so I think that in some ways, the States, it's a lot like that, where you have so many people from so many different backgrounds and so many different like little towns and cities and clubs that it's such a varied swath of ways to play it and approaches. You're never going to get bored, right? And as I've mentioned, I would rather anything than be bored. I hate being bored.
I love that. I'm going to take that certainly away with me from the rest of it, because I'm very much like you, right? And I speak to my best mate who lives here, and he's worked in a school since he's been about 18, 19. He's been there 9 or 10 years now, right? So we get good school holidays per year. We get 13 weeks off per year over here. He starts about 8:30, finishes about 3:13, something like that, right? 3:15, 3:30. And so he gets relatively short days, and he's like, my job is my job, right? I'm very comfortable in life. I've got house, I've got this, I've got that, and therefore he doesn't want to fill his life with too much that goes outside the realms of how he wants to live. And in some spaces that I share the same sort of job role with him. I manage, so I'm above him in terms of the hierarchical structure, right? So I have a lot more responsibility than him, and he sometimes questions me why I take on more responsibility. But then he also speaks to me why I do coaching, why I do podcasting, why I'm going to uni on top of it, why I balance all these things, right? And he's like, don't you just want a simple life? Why don't you just want to switch off? I'm like, no, mate. I absolutely love being on the grass when it's freezing cold or when it's raining. I'm there on a Saturday morning, knowing I've got to get up. There is nothing more important, as you said earlier on, or nothing more enjoyable than when you are touching that grass. You got the freshly pumped balls in front of you, you got your cones, and you just stood there for a couple of minutes admiring the great line that you put out ready for training, right? But it is something special. I'm like, you know what? I love and I live for those moments. And, I'll take the late nights, I'll take the weekends, I'll take the commitment, because I love coaching on top of it. And he's like, but wouldn't you take a life where you are settled and you're okay and you're happy, rather than being traveling all the time for football and the late nights and those weekends? I was like, no, mate, no. I'd rather have the stressful life of football than have the very easy route, mate. And it's just the game which comes with it. And he was someone who was a good footballer, has been on and off with it for now a few years, never pursued coaching. And sometimes I wrap my head, even when I analyze him or observe him or listen to him, I'm like, why have you never done something with a passion? You've always said how much you love it. You've always had an interest in it. So why not go and be an analyst? Why not go and do something to do with something that you love? So sometimes I question that, because we have some very difficult conversations at times around it. But I think it's that mindset as a coach, when we know we want to be in it, that's the most important thing that drives us to do well each day. And certainly, as we said, the reasons that we love working with these players and the individuals that we get in front of us day to day. So it really relates to never wanting to be bored and always making sure we got this passion fueled interest that's within us. But as we've been speaking, I just want to ask you this question, right, Shap? What has been the biggest life lesson that you've learned, whether that's been in life, or whether that's been through coaching, or whether that's been through work, or you might have mentioned it already, or is there something totally different?
I mean, if I had to pick one thing, again, like there's a reason why I got it tattooed on my body. Learning never stops. Like for me, honestly, like, and that wasn't just something that I gimmicky threw it on my arm because like, oh, this would look cool. Like I truly believe it. Like for me, the biggest thing is this understanding, and it's not just with coaching, it's anything, right? Like even if I had to, and again, if I had to step away from coaching or being involved with the sport, and I was just focusing on just teaching, I can always be a better teacher. I can always be a better father. I can always be a better husband. I can always be a better cook. I can always be, you know what I mean? Like, to your friend's point, I get it. Like if that's what makes him happy, but for me, and it sounds like you as well, like I just want to continue to get better at stuff, right? Like I recognize that one of my favorite quotes involved related to education is or coaching is I may not be there yet, but I'm closer than I was yesterday. And so like that, and that was something like when that first couple of years, I was with that first girls program for 3 years, and it was incredibly, I have very fond memories of it, but there were late nights of trying, I should just quit. I'm doing a terrible job. And like all of that self-doubt and all of that stuff, living through it. But it made me better, right? I've been in bad positions, bad coaching positions, bad courses. I've made mistakes. I've made bad choices. I've had to learn from that. But for me, I think that the most important thing is just recognizing that no one person can know everything about a subject, right? Like it's got to be, a constant evolution and adaptation and just constantly trying to get better. Because I truly believe that a person, no matter what environment we're talking about, that there can always be improvement, right? And that's just something I've kind of always felt that way. And then the last couple of years, all of a sudden, I don't even know where I got it from, the whole learning never stops quote. But then all of a sudden, like, then I would start, like when I would finish a course and, like you get your diploma email to you, I would, throw it on Instagram, like hashtag learning never stops. And then, or I would throw out a tweet, hashtag learning never, it just became this sort of mantra. And it wasn't that I only thought about that recently. I think I've always thought about it, but for me, suddenly, I don't know, light bulb went off, epiphany, whatever it was, suddenly just hit me like, just, those 3 words, like learning never stop. That's it. Like, just keep going, keep improving, keep evolving. So if I had to pick one thing, that would be it.
I love that. And I think that's so important to take away. But before we move into the final segments, before we mark off this wonderful episode and time that I spent with you, right? So what does a typical day look like for you? How does teaching, how does coaching look? How does this look in your life? So if we look at tomorrow, for example, what does that look like?
So I'm blessed or cursed, depending on how you look at it. I don't sleep very much. I just don't. Like I get on average between 5 and 6 hours a night, and I'm fine. Like I'm wired. Like my wife hates it because it doesn't matter. Christmas morning, Saturday, I'm up at 5:30, 6 a.m. every day of the week. I just can't, and I try to stay asleep sometimes, but I just can't. So I'm up normally 5:30. I like to get to, so my first job, my full-time job, teaching, I like to get to my classroom early, at least an hour early, so that I can plan out my day, make my copies, have my, cup of coffee, put the radio on, and just be set, and again, sort of like a coach arriving to a training session ahead of time to make sure everything's set up. Like I said, I see classroom teaching much the same way. Tomorrow is Tuesday. So I have my day will finish about 3:00. I'll pick up my daughter from school, come home, help her with homework. My wife will get home, and then I'll have my DOC hat on tomorrow night from like 5 to 8:30 because we're starting our indoor training sessions this week because we just finished our fall season last week. So I'll be observing my U12s and my U11s in their first indoor session. I like to meet up with them ahead of time to sort of talk to them, like, what are you working on tonight and what's your training session look like, stuff like that, and then evaluate the session. Looking forward to it because one of the coaches is newer to the club, so I don't know them as well. The other coach, I coached him. I coached his brother. I've known him, so I have a really good relationship with him. But getting to know this other coach will be exciting. And then I have a little bit of work to do tomorrow night on a project that I'm presenting at the United Soccer Coaches Convention in January. So I'm just wrapping something up. And yeah, so I'll probably be done around 10, 11 o'clock-ish. But I mean, after getting out of the indoor training at 8, I'll be home, have dinner, like, spend time with my kids, my wife, see how their day was. Apart from, I mean, from 3 to 5, I'll be home with my kids, but my wife, her job on Tuesdays, she works a little later in the office. She doesn't get home till about 6:37. So that's a typical Tuesday. And then there really is no typical day for me, just because then Wednesday it's a different schedule. Thursday. So, but I'm normally 5 to midnight every day. I'm up. If I do have some free time, that's when I'm reading or grading papers or doing something. So, but I like to, as I've mentioned, I like to stay active. I like to be doing something, because it's just, that's my comfort zone. Like when I'm being active, when I'm running around, when I'm doing something.
And, so, and again, someone might listen to that and go, "Oh my god, like such long days, and what downtime does he really get?" And look, he's working till 12 at night, and then suddenly he's back at it. I'm like, you know what? He's actually out coaching. He's spending time with the kids. He's been teaching all day. He's been prepared. He's preparing a project for January. He's got the United States he's got the United Coaches Conference coming up, which is really exciting. He's presenting on that. He's got project work coming up, and I see them as all exciting things. And yes, there is a lot of time and energy and commitment going into it, but there's a lot of exciting things that come into it at the same time, where you have lots of different avenues. You get to commit to lots of different things. You get to impact the lives of different people, and you get to do it in a lot of different contexts, which I think is really fascinating. Now, Shap, there's 2 activities that I want to do with you before we wrap up, as I always do with every coach, right? But this one is slightly new, and I've only done it with one coach. So you're going to be the second coach which I do this with, right? And I know we've had this whole episode, and usually I do it right at the start, but we just got into such a great conversation. I never wanted to distract the flow from the moment we got going, right? But you're going to have 30 seconds, and you're going to put in as many coaching tips as you can give coaches within that 30-second period. Now, you could give like 100 coaching tips, or you might give 5 very important ones to you, right? So when we're ready, it's going to be 30 seconds on the timer, right? And we're going to take it from there, mate.
So it's 30 coaching points or 30 pieces of coaching advice. Is that what it is?
So no, just 30 seconds, right? And you just got to put in as many coaching tips or points that you feel are relevant to any coach who might be starting out, experienced, or in there.
Okay, cool.
So
Great.
we're ready to start this 30 seconds with our coach educator, our director of coaching, who is going to inspire us over this next 30 seconds. Okay, go.
When you're putting cones down, walk backwards, because it just helps put them in a straight line. Surround yourself with good people. Like, find good assistants, good people around you, and that'll make life easier. Being vulnerable is not a weakness, right? Like, it's okay to admit that you don't know don't know things. Learning never stops. I've said that a million times in the pod, but it's something I truly believe. There's no such thing as being over prepared. Have 4 backup plans, because no matter how much you plan, you're going to need them. That's it. There we go. 30 seconds. I got a couple in there. Awesome.
Absolutely smashed it. And I love the first one, right? Because when I see any new coach, I'm like, right, do you just mind setting up the perimeter of this 30 by 30 or something, for example? And I get to see him point out cones. So I'm like, right, see how you've just gone off a swerve over there, and they're starting to go, how? I'm like, right, so let's do this again, but start walking backwards as you do it, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, I'm not lying to you, right? So I'm like, also, when you do it, do you mind just putting them all in the same color as well, rather than this mismatch? But there's a lot of good tips in there, which I think are really relevant, and I felt that I really related to there. But now we're getting into the final segment of this podcast, right? So it's going to be quick fire questions for you, nothing to catch you out on, and just wraps up the conversation really nicely, Shap. So are you ready?
Sure, go ahead.
Fab. Okay, so the first question is, if you had to have someone describe you in 3 words, what 3 words would they be?
Energetic, passionate, thinking.
I love that. Okay, if you could move to any country to coach, where would it be?
The Dominican Republic. My wife is Dominican, and I think that the Caribbean doesn't have, I feel like that's the best kept secret in terms of underdeveloped football in the world, right? Like, great weather. They don't have a lot of other sports. And for me, football, you need a ball, and you don't even need goals. You could put down 2 rocks. If I won the lottery, I tell my wife all the time, we would move to Dominican Republic. First of all, she would be ecstatic. So that's great. Make her happy. And then I would open up my own professional soccer complex there, because it's just so much talent and there's not a lot of opportunity. So that would be something I'd be very interested in doing.
You never know, and it may be something that I see you in the news for in a few years' time. Of Shap inspires the next generation of Dominican Republic footballers, and has these amazing academies setting up, and they're starting to compete with the USA. And he's been brought in as an advisor to advise on how the USA can catch up. And look at this, underdeveloped nation of footballers really competing on the world stage. Like, how incredible that would be as an experience and as a story, mind.
Yeah, no, it'd be incredible. But honestly, because we visited, obviously, my wife still has a lot of family there, and I'm like, wow, the weather's great. The space is there for facility. There's a lot of amazing athletes that come out of it, and typically within the Dominican Republic, there's a huge baseball following, and there's some other sports. But I feel like there's not a lot of opportunity, and I feel like it would be an amazing opportunity. So all I got to do is just win the lottery. That's the easy first step. Once I do that, then everything else is cake. Everything else is great.
Everyone else follows, man. If you could spend a day with any coach or manager, who would it be?
Oh man, alive or anyone?
Up to you.
All right, I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna give you two. So, manager, Sir Alex, because again, as a United, I just think that his man management. But if we're talking about like coach, I would say Pep, because I'm a huge fan of like what. And again, right now, teams, when we're taping this, team is sort of struggling. But if you look at his body of work, I mean, it's just incredible the amount of like the high standards and his attention to detail and his passion. I would love to the three of us sitting down over like a meal or something would be incredible. Yeah.
I think so. And I think sometimes just to see a week of work and what goes into the sessions and how much detail, and even just when it comes into, even if it was a 30-minute segment of watching a session, right, and you really took as much as you wanted from it, I think that would just be an incredible experience in that elite environment just to really be around. But if you ever get the opportunity to come over to England and you get to see the training complex of City, oh my gosh, absolutely incredible. Who was or is your role model?
Probably, and it's kind of sad. My dad, but he passed away last year. But he was the one, again, like it was honestly, I look back at how I even got involved in football. Like I was telling, like, I had done wrestling, and I can't even remember starting wrestling because I had started it at such a young age. I don't know if it was them, but it was really my dad who helped me sort of like, because it's such a rapid turnover. Like I had been wrestling. That's all I knew. That was my whole world. Started playing football. And then within 6 months, that was all I cared about. And I even actually kind of went away from wrestling. But it was my dad who, he taught me a lot. He was an athlete. He was a coach. He played American football and basketball. So he was like, okay, listen, I don't really understand soccer at all, but I know that it's important to work hard, or he found me like private training, or he helped me like make it to tryouts and drive all over, because that's the one negative about the States, right? Like everything is so far away from each other. So getting in the car and driving to a training session like 2.5 hours away was not unheard of for my dad. So I would say probably the most significant impact on my life was him.
Very touching, honestly, mate. Very touching. Now I go back to a young Shapiro, right, and I get to talk to the captain that's within him, and I also get to talk to the bloke that I got sat in front of me now. Now I present a card where he becomes a professional footballer, or he only goes as a professional coach in his career, and neither of them can intertwine. So you can't retire and become a coach. You can't become a coach and then have the opportunity to become a player. It's one or the other, right? Which one do you take?
I mean, as tempting as the player would be, I think, and only I guess based on my experience, I'm a much better coach than I was a player. Like I was an okay player. I mean, I don't want to make anyone who listens to this think I was terrible. I was a decent player, but and plus I see so much more the value of being because again, if you're a good coach, you can affect hundreds and thousands of people like over the course of your career. And yeah, if you're Messi, if you're one of the greatest players in the world, or someone else, like you might inspire a lot of them, but they're just sort of seeing your accomplishments. Whereas a coach, they're the one that picks you up off the floor when you just lost, in overtime, or you just lost in a shootout, or you just broke up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, or you got rejected by that college. Like the coach is the one that's there to pick up the pieces. So if I had to pick one, and these are really unfair questions, Luca, but if I had to pick one, I would say be a professional coach. That'd be a pretty cool experience.
Good choice. That makes me very happy because I share the same sentiment there when it comes to that question. But what is your favorite food then?
Anything my wife cooks. Like honestly, like I'm not a picky eater. Like my kids love to make fun of me because the only thing I don't like is just like a slice of like raw tomato. Like I love sauce, I love pizza, I love ketchup. You know, like I know it's makes me a little bit strange, or that's one of the reasons I'm a little bit strange. But I will eat anything. I'm not picky at all. But pretty much anything my wife cooks is my favorite food. To be honest with you.
Yeah, good choice, and I'm sure if she ever listens to this, you'll be very happy and earned you a few points there, mate.
She'll say she'll listen to this, and no offense to you, she just does not care about football in the slightest. Like
No offense.
she loves that I love it, and she
Mm.
supports all of my insane lunatic ramblings about it. But it's just not. She's like, oh, that's great, you know, like anything, the opportunity, like I said last year, to go over to Scotland, complete my UEFA C, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go over to the Orium, and I'm working with this person and this person, Greg Patterson and Danny Lennon. I'm naming all these people that are huge in the Scottish FA, UEFA A pro license, and she was like, oh, all right, like it mattered. I could have just made up the names, and that would have been just the same reaction from her. But yeah, so we'll see.
Favorite film?
Oh man. Does it have to be football related or just favorite film?
Anything you choose.
Dogma. It's a movie by Kevin Smith. Um, I'm a big fan of his work, and I think that's probably my favorite film of his experience.
Favorite TV show?
Simpsons. And I use it in my classroom when I'm teaching, but then also, and it's a nice moment I have with my kids because I think The Simpsons is one of those shows that I can watch it and experience it and enjoy it. And I can sit with my daughters and maybe they won't get every single joke, but they'll also appreciate some parts of it. Right. And there's not a lot of shows like that because I've watched some really terrible children's shows because I love my kids and they liked watching whatever the show was. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so terrible. But Simpsons for me, you can be 80 or you can be 8 and you're going to find something funny in that show.
I think so. I agree with you definitely. If you could recommend one book.
Man, you like pick the toughest one book. I'm an English teacher. That's really challenging. There's a book, to be honest, because I think it's completely universal to sport. I don't think it's necessary. I had to read it for a course I took about football, but it doesn't have to be. But it's the book that talks about the All Blacks, the team from New Zealand. It's called Legacy. And it's not a long read. It's not super complex. They just sort of walk through their approach to teamwork, to philosophy, and not just like sports wise, but I think it relates so well to just you could be a banker and reading this book is going to help you in your life, or a coach or a teacher or anything. I think it's got some incredible life lessons. And again, for anyone who's listening to the pod who's not familiar, I mean, there's such a dominant program in their sport. Obviously, like the things they say about their approach, I put a lot of value in it. So that's probably one of the most impactful books I've ever read as well.
It's a great book. It's on my to-do list. It's literally, I bought it about 2 years ago. It still sits in the pile to read. But I've heard a lot of great things about that book, and I think there's a lot of great things to take away about that period of time. But they talk a lot about that in terms of another book that I'm reading by a bloke called Alistair Campbell in terms of winners. He also talks about TQM in terms of what was taken away by another rugby coach, and that is total quality management in that situation, and how they manage each of that situation. So that's quite an interesting perspective if you ever get a chance to read into that. But if you weren't coaching and you weren't teaching, what would you be doing?
My first thing that I was passionate about, and unfortunately, I do want to again, I'm already busy enough, but I was very active in my middle school, high school, college, and then after college, like theater. Like I was an actor before I was anything. As I mentioned, I used to get into a lot of trouble in school. And right now, like the Shap you see, it takes like years of practice to sit still. I mean, we're going on 2 hours now to sit still this long. That's a challenge for me. I probably have ADHD and just was never classified or anything. And so if you can imagine that sort of energy and passion and all that stuff, but with no focus at like 9, 10, 11, 12, I was I was just a ball of energy and needed a direction. And apart from my dad, probably one of the other role models, and my mom too, but one of the other role models I would really point to was a woman named Edna Powell, who was like my 6th grade language arts teacher, but she was also in charge of the little school drama play that was done every spring. And she could have, talking about sometimes the coach having to do the hard thing. I would get in trouble. I would get yelled at by every other adult in the school. She was the first person that looked at it and said, okay, yeah, listen, because everybody called me Billy when I was young, but Billy's constantly getting in trouble, but why? Like, maybe we can take that and channel it into something. And 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, because I'm, all that energy, I enjoyed being a class clown. I enjoyed being the center of attention. So if I couldn't coach and I couldn't teach, I would, maybe not even be an actor, maybe a director, something involved in the theater, because I love it as well. It's another passion of mine.
Very interesting, but also relates very much to coaching in a similar way, because you would sort of be enabling a type of coaching to yourself where you have to get into character and portray different perspectives and stories, which I think is very interesting, especially when we take those away. But who is your all-time favorite player?
Man, these are the most diabolical questions, Luca. My favorite player, not the best player, my favorite. Paul Scholes.
Good choice.
Because for me, when like I said, people who are younger now who are listening aren't, when they hear me say that Man United's my favorite, club, oh damn, wow, they're so bad. But watching Scholes, I mean, one of my favorite football related quotes ever is when somebody asks Zidane like to be the best player in the world, and he said, "Ask Paul Scholes." And for me, like, when you have a player of Zidane's stature pointing at another player and saying, "Nope, he's better than me," and again, sort of like see, like, Scholes was not the biggest, was not the fastest, was not the strongest, but in terms of football intelligence and just how he just knew, he knew, okay, I'm really upset that he never really, I mean, I know he's got little stits and stats here, coaching wise, but I always thought that he'd be a phenomenal coach just because the way he saw it. But again, it's not for everybody. But if you're talking about my absolute favorite player, it's definitely Scholesy. Absolutely.
A good choice. He did go into coaching for a bit, managing Oldham Athletic. It didn't last very long. I think he was only there for 4 games. But as you say there, I always look at those players and I wonder why they didn't have a longer experience, or even go, right, perhaps management wasn't for me, but perhaps coaching was. And I think sometimes, I know some people slate Gary Neville, right? But I think when you look at his record as a coach, even when he was at Valencia, it wasn't awful. And I think that he is a very good coach there. He's been an analyst, but he's got a lot of other things going on in his life, which I'm really pleased for, that he's not lost to the game altogether. But people say the same thing about Jamie Carragher and all these different other guys involved in it. And then sometimes I do think back, and I'd love just to have a 30-minute conversation with them about why they don't go into coaching. And I think that would be a fascinating conversation to have those things. What is your biggest pet peeve then? And this might be coaching or personal life. It might interlink.
People who are closed-minded. Like and again, it's because I teach English language arts. So a big component of that is, reading a story or analyzing a story and having different points of view. As long as you can sort of explain to me why you think a particular thing, you're not necessarily wrong. Maybe there's a better way of explaining it, but there's multiple points of view, right? Like the maths, the sciences, they never really appealed to me, because in maths, right? Like if the answer is 7, that's it. The answer is 7. There's one answer, that's it. So I think it's the same for my classroom teaching, then also football. Like there is more than one way to play football, right? And so if you might have a different opinion on how it should be played or what we should do in a certain instance, but I'm not going to wrong. I'm just going to say you have a different one. So for me, one pet peeve, I hate closed-minded people. I just don't like it.
It is tough, especially when you have to try and educate those people and they just don't want any part of it. That can be very enduring in itself. I know you said about having mental breaks and going on walks and listening to podcasts and vacations. But if I was to say to you, right, you've got access to anything tomorrow, you can go and do anything for the day. It's all down to you. You can take who you want, wherever you want. What is your biggest thing to do in your most favorite thing to do in downtime?
I mean, if I had anything like unlimited resource, my wife, my kids go to like Disneyland, wherever, just go on big. I don't care where,
Mm.
just to be able to get away and just to do that because that's harder, because now my kids are getting older. So my youngest is getting involved in like singing in the choir. My oldest is, like I said, cheerleading. My wife has a great busy work schedule. So if magically, if we could just get away for a day and go somewhere for like a impromptu holiday, that'd be the best thing for me, to be honest.
Lovely. Honestly, very, very lovely that. What do you have any non-negotiables, if any? And if so, what would three of them be?
We over me, right? So I mentioned that earlier. Like, it's got to be more about the program. Honesty, that's a non-negotiable thing for me. I really and I try, and it's a tough thing sometimes with kids. I'd rather you tell me something you think I don't want to hear than you lie to me,
Mm.
right? Because a lot of, I think, coaching and players, like the coach player paradigm, it's a lot of trust, right? So and if I can't trust you, right? And it goes both ways. I don't lie to players, right? And it's been hard, and there are times where it's not the easiest conversation to have, but I just rather be honest. I don't see the point in lying. And then I guess just hard work, right? Just keep working hard, like just work, right? Like nothing that's worth having is easy to get, right? So we over me, honesty, and hard work. Those would be my three.
And you might have mentioned this earlier, but just one of the final questions that I posed you. But what is the one thing you enjoy most about coaching?
Helping others, like honest, like whether I'm a classroom teacher or like I genuinely like it. Like there are times where I will help out, coaches that either work for me on the club side or the high school, or I have friends that coach in other areas of New Jersey and other parts of the country, and just helping them out. Like to me, that's a great feeling, right? Like, again, I work in a really lowly funded public school, right? I work at a club where we don't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of, like, I've had opportunities. I could have gone elsewhere to, like, whether it's teach or coach, but there's a lot of people here that I can help. And so I genuinely enjoy helping others. And so for me, that's probably the best part of coaching is just helping, whether get better at a particular technical skill or understanding something tactical or learning a life lesson. I just enjoy helping others.
And the final question I have for you, right? What does reflection mean to you?
An opportunity. It's an opportunity to get better at something. Like I like so whether I'm teaching or coaching, I keep like a reflection journal. So when I'm coaching, at the end of every session, I kind of write down my thoughts, how I thought it went, what I thought I would do better. Teaching, teaching is in my own context, it's too much stuff. So I do it once a week. I'll do it at the end of each week. I'll just sort of jot down, what did I want to accomplish this week? Was I successful? And then what would I do better? Um, but for me, I look at reflecting as it's just an opportunity to like get better, right? Like, and you can't do it. You can't get better unless you reflect, right? Like you have to look inward and say, all right, and honest and do it in an honest way, right? Like if you're looking at everything with rose colored glasses and, oh no, it was wonderful and it was great. If you're not being honest with yourself, then you're really not going to get any better at anything.
I think that's a fantastic analogy of what reflection is, and certainly what it means to you, especially over a fantastic career, and certainly what you're doing now every day, and the different things that you're involved in, and having those various hats to piece that together. But we've been talking for almost 2 hours and 20 minutes now, and it has been an incredible period of time that I spent with you. And I do appreciate the fact that you sat in an office, I assume, right, for the last 2 hours, and have been confined to this space, right? But I do appreciate it, and I know it's getting later on into your day, well after 4 o'clock, I believe, if my timings are right. And it is later in the day for you, but it has been incredible the fact that we started on early afternoon, now we're into sort of late afternoon, but the fact that we pieced this together has been an incredible 2 hours of my time, because I've taken so much away from you and the amount of little jottings of timings and notes that I have. But I have really enjoyed this opportunity to meet you and get to know you. And I think it's going to be great in terms of what you do in terms of the coaches conference. And I look forward to seeing more about what you do as well. But honestly, I'm so grateful for your time and your flexibility and how you've pieced this together as well, and what I've been able to take from you. Honestly, I've had a fantastic Monday evening, and I hope everyone else takes as much away as I have. And if they're not, then they're really missing out.
Well, before we go, I mean, thank you as well. Like, you're up much later than I am, so we're fine. And just like you took a lot away, like I had my own notes going. Of Adam Grant is the next book I'm going to be buying and checking out. So I appreciate your time and the opportunity as well. And who knows, maybe I can come back another time and we can talk about some other stuff.
Absolutely, that I think we've just only touched the surface. So it'd be great if we could create that at another time and when it suits you. And especially be great to hit off the 2025 with another episode. And I think that'd be really good in part of my thinking as I've been looking at this. But I hope you have an enjoyable Monday and good luck with your very long day tomorrow and the rest of the week. But we live for these moments, and this is what coaching and life is all about. But honestly, it's been so great to have this opportunity to be part of it. And thank you very much for your time today, mate.
Thanks, Coach. Really appreciate your time as well.
Cheers, chat. Well, I'll speak to you soon, and have a great day.
Thanks. You too. Take care.
Thank you.
But yeah, we try to be that group that can help be there for the players as a three, because I think you mentioned earlier, you want to have different characters in the changing room. You want to have different personalities. You don't want the same kind of people, because you're not going to be able to move forward. If you've got 10 people and they all agree the same things, you're going to get to a point in time where actually you're going to become unstuck. You need that one person to actually be like, nah, I don't agree with that. Or actually, we should try this. And I think that's why the huddle works, is we're all quite different as human beings. And I think you need 3 different people in there, because some players will naturally gravitate towards me and my personality, but equally some might go to the other 2, and that's absolutely fine.